Chapter 207. Yi Xian, just kill us if you want to. Don't expect us to beg you. The Princess of Japan was still a young girl, but the determination on her face was extremely strong. It was as if she had already expected her ending, and there was no hope in her eyes. Chi! A sword light slashed out again, and the Princess of Japan's left arm was cut off. She let out a painful groan, but she gritted her teeth and refused to make a sound. Not bad, you have some backbone. Yi Xian nodded slightly. However, when he opened and closed his eyes, a hint of cruelty and brutality flashed across them, causing the temperature of the entire Heavenly Emperor Pavilion to drop. All of a sudden, Yi Xian smiled at the camera in Fatso Huang's hand. His voice was merciless and cold as he said, "Miyamoto Takeda, I'll only give you 3 days. If I don't see you within 3 days, not only will your children die, but your ministers will also die." It was the same words, but a different scene. A few days ago, Miyamoto Takeda had also said the same words. However, after a few days, the same scene also happened to Yi Xian. Don't be delusional. Even if you kill us, my father won't appear. However, I want to tell you that my father will definitely avenge us, the Prince of Japan roared furiously. Ha! Yi Xian smiled playfully. However, his smile was very strange and sinister as he said, "How about I make a bet with you? If Miyamoto Takeda comes to save you, not only will I not kill you, but I will also spare his life. We can also forget about the past." As Yi Xian's words fell, a large number of surprised voices came from the Heavenly Emperor Pavilion. Even the Prince and Princess of Japan's furious expressions turned sluggish. Are you serious? The Princess of Japan said with a trembling voice. Yi Xian smiled and said in a gentle voice, "I've always been a man of my word. As long as Miyamoto Takeda comes to save you, I'll spare the lives of your entire family." Sir, you. Fatso Huang, who was filming, was stunned. He did not understand why Yi Xian would make this bet. He wanted to stop him, but he swallowed his words. At this moment, Yi Xian did not have the slightest bit of hostility. Instead, he gave off a refreshing feeling. He looked at the camera with a smile and said, "Miyamoto Takeda, did you hear that? As long as you are willing to save your children, I can spare your lives." At the same time, in a remote city in Xia country, Miyamoto Takeda's hair was messy as he stared at the video being broadcasted in the city center. When he saw the scene of his children's limbs being severed, he gritted his teeth so hard that they almost shattered. His bloodshot eyes were filled with an indescribable hatred. However, when he heard Yi Xian's promise, Miyamoto Takeda's breathing stopped and he fell into a trance. He did not know if Yi Xian was telling the truth. If he appeared in front of Yi Xian, would Yi Xian really let his family go? Sigh, Divine King Ye's methods are too cruel. What do you know? Miyamoto Takeda killed so many of Divine King Ye's subordinates. How can he let Miyamoto Takeda go? That's right. Even if Miyamoto Takeda goes to save his children, he will definitely die. If you don't believe me, let's wait and see. A large number of discussions entered Miyamoto Takeda's ears, which made his body tremble. He clenched his fists tightly, and he did not even realize that his nails had dug into his palms and were bleeding. "Child, father has let you down, but don't worry. Sooner or later, I will personally kill that bastard Yi Xian and avenge you." Miyamoto Takeda smiled bitterly and imprinted Yi Xian's appearance in his mind. Then, he turned around and walked into the distance. However, the tears at the corner of his eyes could not stop flowing. Japan, Emperor Pavilion. 3 days was neither long nor short, but to the Japanese courtiers, princes, and princesses, it was as long as a century. They were on tenterhooks. They longed for Miyamoto Takeda to appear, but after 3 consecutive days, Miyamoto Takeda did not appear in the Emperor Pavilion at all. The sun rose and the moon set, and the stars moved. When the sun shone on the 4th day, Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes. The corners of his mouth curled into a cruel and sinister smile. Time's up. It was as if the bell of the dead was tolled, as if the mourning of the dead was heard. When Yi Xian's voice sounded in the Emperor Pavilion, the Japanese prince and princess's faces turned pale. Wait. Wait. My father will definitely come, the Japanese prince pleaded with Yi Xian in a trembling voice. Yi. Divine King Yi, please give us one more chance. Our father will definitely not leave us in the lurch, the Japanese princess cried out. That's right, Divine King Yi. The emperor will definitely be on his way, the courtiers pleaded while trembling. Sir, kill them, Fatso Huang advised Yi Xian with a ferocious and vicious expression. Unfortunately, Yi Xian smiled slightly, then slowly shook his head and said, I'm a very benevolent person. Since you're begging me, I'll give Miyamoto Takeda some more time. Yi Xian closed his eyes again, but the smile at the corner of his mouth made Fatso Huang's face turn pale, and extreme fear rose in his heart. Fatso Huang admitted that he had followed Yi Xian for so long. Although he could not see through his master, Fatso Huang knew that every time Yi Xian smiled like this, it meant that something extremely terrifying was about to happen. This also made Fatso Huang look at the Japanese prince and the others with great pity. The sun set and night fell. A day had passed, but Miyamoto Takeda still did not appear. The Japanese prince and the others' faces were pale, and their lips were trembling. They looked out of the Emperor Pavilion, hoping that their father could save their lives at the last moment. Unfortunately, what awaited them was endless despair. Not even a mosquito appeared outside the Emperor Pavilion, let alone a figure. Why? Why? The Japanese prince roared miserably. Father! Father! You! Are you really going to abandon us? The Japanese princess gritted her teeth, and large amounts of tears flowed out of her eyes. She was already sobbing. Your Majesty, where are you? The officials cried out because they really did not want to die. At this moment, Yi Xian opened his eyes once again and calmly looked at the Japanese prince and the others. A trace of a smile appeared on his face as he said, I'll give you 7 more days. This is also my last bit of mercy. The sudden pleasant surprise caused the officials, princes, and princesses to be stunned. After that, ecstasy appeared on their faces as they loudly thanked Yi Xian. Even the hatred in their eyes had decreased by a lot. 1 day. 2 days. 3 days. 7 days. Time flowed like water. 7 days passed. The Japanese prince and the others' faces were withered, and their eyes were red with despair. Their hearts sank to the bottom, and then it turned into final despair. Dong, dong, dong. The sound of heavy footsteps could be heard. Unknowingly, Yi Xian had quietly appeared in front of the Japanese prince and princess. His eyes were filled with pity as he looked at the two of them. Do you see that? Your father won't come to save you. You've already been abandoned by him. He's selfish and afraid of death. Even though I've given your family a chance to live, he won't dare to take the risk to save you. Like the whisper of a demon, Yi Xian's voice was filled with bewitchment. It also made the Japanese prince and princess clench their fists tightly, and tears flowed from their eyes. Chapter 208. All of a sudden, Yi Xian's eyes were filled with cruelty and viciousness. He raised his arms and grabbed the prince and princess of Japan's necks, lifting them into the air. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. Yi Xian's expression was ferocious and cruel. His 10 fingers were clenching, causing the two of them to struggle in pain. Their bruised faces were filled with despair and resentment, looking mournful and terrifying. Do you hate? Do you resent? Do you feel indignant? Yi Xian said sinisterly, and the smile on his face grew wider. Actually, you don't have to die. As long as Miyamoto Takeaki is willing to save you, you can reunite as a family. TSK, TSK, TSK. Looking at the hatred and resentment in their eyes, Yi Xian slowly shook his head and sighed, "What a pity, what a pity. Miyamoto Takeaki can even abandon his own flesh and blood. I can only fulfill his wish." Crack. Yi Xian's expression was brutal as he exerted force with both of his palms, directly breaking the necks of the two of them. He also caused the Japanese prince and princess to die in despair and anger. Their eyes were wide open as they died, proving how much they couldn't die in peace. "Fatso Huang, kill them." After personally killing Miyamoto Takeaki's children, Yi Xian said with a cold expression. "Yes, sir." Fatso Huang smiled ferociously. He raised the blood blade in his hand and crazily slaughtered the many courtiers present. "Ah! Spare me. I don't want to die. Your Majesty, where are you?" Mournful roars, unwillingness, anger, and even pleas for mercy could be heard. A large amount of blood splattered in the Heavenly Emperor Pavilion. After dozens of breaths, the entire Heavenly Emperor Pavilion had completely turned into a slaughterhouse. There was no longer any sound. Woo, woo, woo. Suddenly, a cold wind blew and the souls of the dead cried. A bone-chilling coldness appeared in the entire Heavenly Emperor Pavilion. Born as a human, dead as a ghost. Gather the evil energy of heaven and earth, gather the angry spirits of the dead. Gather. Yi Xian's expression was sinister and cruel. The light of the 6 paths of reincarnation shone around him. When his palms and fingers swept through the air, blood-red runes condensed. The entire Heavenly Emperor Pavilion was filled with the howls of ghosts. A terrifying thing happened. Kakik. A sinister wind blew, and malicious ghosts howled furiously. 2 soul bodies suddenly floated out from the corpses of the Japanese prince and princess. Their ferocious faces were the souls of the 2 princes. Ugh! The souls of the officials were also condensing. They were roaring in anger, causing the entire Heavenly Emperor Pavilion to turn into hell. It made one's hair stand on end and their scalps turn numb. "I'll roast you in the underworld fire and torture you for eternity." Yi Xian's voice was cold and merciless. When he crossed his palms, the dark underworld fire enveloped the souls. The strange and dark fire roasted the souls until they screamed in pain. "Ah! Your Majesty! Father!" The underworld fire roasted them, and their cries were shrill. The Japanese prince and princess howled in pain in the underworld fire. The anger and resentment around them were so dense that it seemed to have materialized. That soaring anger and resentment was extremely frightening. "Hate, hate, be angry. I'll roast you in the underworld fire for eternity. You'll never be able to reincarnate. The reason why you're in such a state is all because of Takeda Miyamoto." Yi Xian said in a low voice, causing the faces of the Japanese prince and princess to contort even more in pain. The black resentment around them grew thicker. "Father! Why? Why didn't you come and save us?" The Japanese prince turned into a malicious ghost and howled in pain in the underworld fire. "Father! Your daughter is in so much pain. It's so painful." The Japanese princess cried bitterly. However, her protruding eyeballs made her look extremely sinister and scary. "Keep." A soul-absorbing flag appeared in Yi Xian's hand. As Yi Xian pointed at the 2 of them, the soul-absorbing flag sucked their souls into the flag. It also sucked in the ghosts of the courtiers. Use your bloodline as a guide and the ghosts to open the way. Go and find your father and his majesty. Ask him why he abandoned you. Yi Xian smiled coldly. The soul-absorbing flag in his hand let out the screams of the ghosts. With an aura of anger and resentment that broke through the clouds, it turned into a terrifying beam of light and shot into the distant sky. Hiss! Fatso Huang witnessed this terrifying scene from the beginning to the end. Cold sweat rolled down his forehead and an uncontrollable chill rose from the bottom of his heart. It was as if he had fallen into the abyss of hell. "Sir, what are you?" Fatso Huang said with a trembling voice. Yi Xian's expression was cold. He narrowed his eyes and said, Miyamoto Takeaki thought that he could survive by giving up the lives of his children. However, he never thought that under the guidance of his children's bloodline, he won't be able to escape from my grasp. When I turn Miyamoto Takeaki's children into malicious ghosts and roast them in the underworld fire, the pain they will suffer will be extreme. The greater the pain, the greater their resentment toward Miyamoto Takeaki. Yi Xian paused for a moment as he spoke. A sinister smile appeared on his face as he said, moreover, I really want to see if Miyamoto Wu Tian will choose to exterminate their souls when he faces his children and ask for their lives, or if he will allow his children to turn into malicious spirits and bite him. Unfortunately, no matter what he chooses, he will suffer a fate worse than death. Yi Xian's voice was low and vicious. It also made Fatso Huang shudder. He was extremely shocked by Yi Xian's vicious methods. Let's go. Let's watch a good show. Yi Xian smiled. When he took a step forward, he turned into a stream of light and shot away. The vast mountains rose and fell continuously. In a desolate valley, there was a stone house, a clear pond, and 2 acres of farmland. There was nothing else. Miyamoto Takeaki was dressed like a farmer. The Kusanagi sword lay across his knees. He sat cross-legged and cultivated. As he breathed, the Kusanagi sword constantly spewed out spiritual chi for him to slowly absorb. Miyamoto Takeaki lived in seclusion in the mountains and avoided the world. This was what he did. Miyamoto Takeaki knew that his children must have been killed by Yi Xian. He was filled with hatred and resentment. His life's goal was to tear Yi Xian into pieces. However, he knew that he was no match for Yi Xian at the moment. Even if he absorbed the spiritual chi from the Kusanagi sword every day and stepped into the tribulation passing stage, it was impossible for him to seek revenge on Yi Xian. He was also no match for Yi Xian. He could not see the path ahead. He could only pray bitterly to the heavens. He hoped that the heavens would open their eyes and allow the spiritual chi of heaven and earth to recover. Only then would he have the hope of revenge. Unfortunately, Miyamoto Takeaki was only deceiving himself. He knew very well that even Miyamoto Masakawa had waited for thousands of years, but the spiritual chi of heaven and earth did not recover. In the end, in order to save him from Yi Xian, a wisp of his soul dissipated between heaven and earth. He lived in a muddle-headed manner. He could not see any hope ahead. If it were not for the hatred in his heart supporting him, perhaps Miyamoto Takeaki would have already lost his worries and committed suicide in this desolate valley. Chapter 209. Father. Father. Where are you? Father. Father. I'm in so much pain. Your Majesty. Your Majesty. All of a sudden, a beam of gloomy light surged above the valley. An eerie voice called out to him, accompanied by a strange voice that sounded like crying and laughter. The sky gradually darkened, and the wailing of the dead was faintly discernible. There were even strange laughter and miserable howls, and it was as if this valley had turned into the netherworld. Who is it? Miyamoto Takeda's expression changed drastically. He suddenly opened his eyes, and the spiritual light around him surged. He held the Kusanagi sword tightly in his hand. However, his body was trembling at this moment, and his pupils shrank. This was because he saw someone, an enemy that he couldn't wait to tear into pieces. Ripples spread out in the void. Yi Xian, dressed in black, was walking in the sky. The smile on his face was as warm as the spring breeze. There was no trace of killing intent around him. He just smiled and stared at Takashi Miyamoto in the valley. Clap. 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 Yi Xian applauded softly and said with a smile, Brother Miyamoto, you're really elegant. I really admire you for cultivating your body and mind in this pure land. Yi Xian. Takashi Miyamoto's face was as gloomy as water. He retreated, and the spiritual light around him completely covered him. He looked at Yi Xian with shock and anger. Chi! Without saying anything, Takashi Miyamoto turned into a stream of light and fled into the distance. He didn't know how Yi Xian found him, but he knew that if he didn't escape now, he would definitely die in Yi Xian's hands. Rumble. The blood-red light covered the sky and sealed the world. Before Takashi Miyamoto could escape from the valley, terrifying lights rose from all directions and completely blocked his body. There was no way for him to escape. There was no path to the heavens and no door to the earth. This was a trapping formation set up by Yi Xian. Even though Miyamoto Wu Tian was a body integration cultivator, it was impossible for him to break this formation in a short period of time. TSK TSK TSK. Yi Xian looked disappointed. He slowly shook his head and said, "Brother Miyamoto, you and I are old acquaintances. Why do you want to leave when you see me? Why don't you and I have a drink here and bury the hatchet?" Yi Xian slowly walked out of the void. When he waved his sleeves, a stone table and 2 stone stools appeared in the valley. There were 2 jade cups and a jug of wine on the table as if Yi Xian really wanted to drink with Miyamoto Takeaki. Yi Xian sat down on the stone bench. He lifted the wine jug and poured himself a cup of wine. He drained the wine in the cup in one gulp, giving off a leisurely feeling. "Yi Xian, if you want to kill me, just do it. There's no need to play games with me." Miyamoto Takeaki roared at Yi Xian with bloodshot eyes. Since he couldn't run away, he had to face Yi Xian. Even if he had to die, he had to fight Yi Xian with all his might. "No, no, no. Brother Miyamoto, you've misunderstood. I won't kill you. It's just that some people want to meet you. I'm a merciful person, so I can't bear to refuse their request." Yi Xian smiled gently. Buzz! A gloomy light surged and the ghost screamed. A gloomy light swooped down and appeared in front of Miyamoto Takeaki. He saw a soul-assimilating banner fluttering in the wind. The horrible screams came from the soul-assimilating banner. "Father! Father! I miss you so much. Father! I'm in so much pain. Why don't you come and save me? Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" the ghosts screamed and wailed. When the soul-assimilating banner waved, a large number of ghosts walked out of it. Their eyes were bleeding, and their black and white pupils were protruding. They were staring at Miyamoto Takeaki. This. Thud. 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 Looking at the ghosts in front of him, looking at the Japanese prince and princess's bleeding eyes and ferocious appearance, Miyamoto Takeaki's face turned pale. He staggered backward. "Yi Xian!" Miyamoto Takeaki screamed. He gritted his teeth so hard that they were about to shatter. He looked at Yi Xian with an indescribable hatred. If looks could kill, Yi Xian would have been killed by Miyamoto Takeaki 1,000,000 times over. You're so vicious. Not only did you kill them, you even refined them into malicious spirits. Miyamoto Take-10 roared as he trembled. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he looked at his children with unconcealable sorrow. No. Yi Xian shook his head slowly. "Brother Miyamoto, you can't blame me for this. I promised them that as long as you appear before me, I'll spare your family's lives. I'm even willing to write off the grudge between us." Sigh. Yi Xian sighed and said, "What a pity. I gave Brother Miyamoto a chance, but you didn't know how to cherish it. As for me, I'm a man of my word. Since you didn't appear, and I said that I'll kill your family, I'll definitely kill your family. Their deaths are all because of you, Brother Miyamoto." As Yi Xian's words entered his ears, Miyamoto Takeaki's face turned pale. His body trembled, and tears kept flowing out of his eyes. He roared. Yi Xian, you despicable man. Today, even if I, Miyamoto Takeaki, am going to tear you into pieces. Tear you into pieces. A cold smile appeared on Yi Xian's face. Yi Xian shook his head in disdain. Brother Miyamoto, don't you find it strange? Why can I find you? It's not that I don't want to let you go, but your children are connected to you by blood. I was only led here by them. I was also kind enough to let your family reunite. I'll kill you. Miyamoto Takeaki roared. He held the Kusanagi sword in his hand, and terrifying spiritual light surrounded him. It was as if he was going to attack Yi Xian in the next moment. All of a sudden. Before Miyamoto Takeaki could make a move, something that shocked him happened. The spiritual light around him became even more chaotic. Father, come and accompany me. Father. I'll be roasted by the netherworld fire forever. It's really painful. Your Majesty, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. Miyamoto Takeaki's son and daughter were smiling at him eerily. Their pale hands had turned into terrifying ghost claws and were grabbing at Miyamoto Takeaki. Their bulging eyes were filled with anger and resentment. Children. Children. I am your father. Miyamoto Takeda kept retreating. Even his voice was trembling. He gripped the Kusanagi sword tightly as he looked at his children in disbelief. Father? The Japanese prince tilted his head and laughed sinisterly. His eyes were vicious as he looked at Miyamoto Wu Tian. His voice was sinister as he said, Father. Your Majesty. Have you arrived? I was twisted by Yi Xian to death. If you came to save me, how could I die in his hands? Chapter 210. Father. Emperor. I won't be able to rest in peace even after I die. This hellfire is burning me so painfully. The Princess of Japan's small face was contorted ferociously. The hellfire on her body burned, and her painful cries were like steel needles piercing into Miyamoto Takeaki's mind. Miyamoto Takeaki clutched his chest and staggered backward. Takeda Miyamoto's children were staring at him. Their pale ghostly claws emitted a terrifying ghostly aura. The anger and resentment around them had reached its peak. Puchi. Takeda Miyamoto spat out a mouthful of blood essence. He bit his lips so hard that they were bleeding. His steel teeth were chattering, and his eyes were filled with deep sorrow. The Kusanagi sword in his hand fell to the ground, and the spiritual light around him dissipated without a trace. It was obvious that his children were asking for his life, causing him extreme pain. Yi Xian, you bastard! Takeda Miyamoto roared with a trembling voice, but tears flowed out of his eyes uncontrollably. At this moment, Yi Xian raised his wine cup and drank all the wine in it. Then, he looked at Takeda Miyamoto indifferently and said, Brother Miyamoto, you only have two choices now. You can either destroy the souls of your children with your own hands, or you can let them devour your flesh, blood, and soul. But I have to remind you that if you destroy the souls of your children, they won't even have the chance to reincarnate. Can you really do it? Puchi. 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 As Yi Xian finished speaking, a large amount of blood flowed out from the corner of Takeda Miyamoto's mouth. Faced with such a cruel choice, he really felt like dying. Plop. Suddenly, Takeda Miyamoto knelt on the ground and kept kowtowing to Yi Xian. He cried out loud, Yi Xian, I beg you. I beg you to let them go. I can kill myself in front of you, even if my soul is destroyed. I beg you. Takeda Miyamoto's face was full of tears. He had already been tortured by Yi Xian to the point of madness. He even ignored his dignity and kowtowed to Yi Xian, begging him. He looked extremely pitiful at first glance. Unfortunately, Yi Xian was unmoved by Takeda Miyamoto's pleading. Instead, he smiled coldly and said, Brother Miyamoto, enjoy this test of humanity. He. As soon as Yi Xian finished speaking, the Japanese prince and princess let out a loud howl as they pounced towards Miyamoto Wu Tian with anger and resentment. A large number of vengeful ghosts followed closely behind, instantly drowning Miyamoto Wu Tian. Ah! The ferocious ghosts tore at Miyamoto Takeaki, and blood could be vaguely seen. The terrifying anger and resentment erupted, and the hateful howls could be heard. Miyamoto Takeaki's flesh was torn apart, and his heart-wrenching cries could be heard. Despair, sadness, tears, and unwilling roars came from Takeda Miyamoto's mouth. Takeda Miyamoto's body was being torn apart by the ghosts. In order to not live in pain, he pretended to be a dog. Perhaps this was his best choice. Let's go. Yi Xian suddenly turned and walked out of the valley. Fatso Huang was startled. He quickly asked, "Sir, this person's cultivation is too terrifying. Even if he's really crazy, he's still a great hidden danger. Why don't we kill him on the spot? That way, we can avoid a lot of trouble. Some people are dead but still alive. Some people are alive but already dead. Although he's alive now, his soul has been sealed for a long time. Moreover, the spiritual energy in his body is dissipating. In a few days, he will become immortal. Let him die in this valley." Yi Xian said softly. He didn't have any reluctance to leave this place. He let Fatso Huang follow quickly. However, Takeda Miyamoto's silly laughter came from the valley behind them. Death wasn't scary. What was scary was living a life worse than death. Yi Xian didn't have the slightest bit of pity because he knew that pity for the enemy was cruelty to oneself. If he didn't crush Takeda Miyamoto's cultivation, not only would he die, but Takeda Miyamoto wouldn't let the people around him go. Since he was an enemy, he would let him die a horrible death. This was Yi Xian's principle. The Emperor of Japan was driven crazy by Yi Xian. Although he was still alive, it was no different from being dead. This was also Takeda Miyamoto's final outcome. Chapter 211. Heartbroken Mountain, Blood Sea Battlefield. Foul wind, sea of blood, bones. This was a burial ground, an ancient battlefield where death was the only movement. There was no light here, and there was no hope. Between heaven and earth, there was a blazing blood light that covered the sky. On top of the mountain of corpses and bones, Yuan Ling sat high on the white bone throne. His body was covered in black light, and there was even a bloody light around him. When he opened and closed his eyes, he looked at the heaven's gate. Gu Xiaoxiao should be making her move soon, right? A blood-red shadow quietly appeared beside Yuan Ling and said in a deep voice. "Do you think Yi Xian will kill her?" Yuan Ling said mysteriously. "It's hard to say." The blood-red shadow shook his head slowly and said, "I have never understood Yi Xian. You said he was heartless, but he left the ancient battlefield for his family. You said he had feelings, but he gave up his family and wanted to become an immortal in the mortal world to fight against you." A gust of foul wind blew, and Yuan Ling stretched his arms and stood up from the white bone throne. His eyes were deep as he said, "I can tell you that although he looks heartless, he has feelings in his heart. If he really was heartless, why would he be involved in the boundless secular world? So, he won't kill Gu Xiaoxiao?" The blood-red shadow asked seriously. Unfortunately, Yuan Ling did not answer this question. Instead, he said, "Yi Xian wants to become an immortal in the mortal world and escape from my control. Then I will fulfill his wish. As long as he devours Gu Xiaoxiao's blood, he can enter the late stage of the tribulation passing stage and usher in the 9 heavens immortal tribulations." Difficult, difficult, difficult. The blood-red shadow shook his head and said, "He has killed many people, and his sins are too heavy. How can you be so sure that he can pass the 9 heavens immortal tribulations? You should know that when you became an immortal, if I did not lend you the exquisite blood sea pagoda, the 9 heavens immortal tribulations would have killed you. And you have to understand that if he really passes the 9 heavenly tribulations, then his life force will surpass that of mortals. He will be able to use 10% of the heaven-destroying halberd's power. Aren't you afraid of dying in his hands? Yuan Ling said in an unfathomable voice, this is a huge gamble. I'm betting that Yi Xian can survive the 9 heavenly immortal tribulations. As for the battle between me and him, he can only be defeated by me. You know, if I don't have the means to keep him in check, how can I let him become an immortal? What if you lose the bet? The bloody shadow sighed. I won't lose. As long as he can pass the immortal tribulation and push open this door that has been sealed for 10,000 years, you and I will be able to see the light of day again. Yuan Ling smiled. All right, I'll bet with you. But just in case, I will also step into the human world to help this kid. The bloody shadow's light dimmed and turned into a stream of light before disappearing. As the blood-red figure left, the Yuan spirit remained silent. After a few dozen breaths of time, a sneer came from the Yuan spirit's mouth. Blood River, you're really an old fox. Since you don't trust me and want to leave yourself a way out, I'll see what happens in the end. Jiangnan City, Xia Country. It had been half a year since the battle between Takashi Miyamoto and Yi Xian. The ruined Jiangnan City was rebuilt once again. A large number of people returned to their former homes, making Jiangnan City full of vitality again. The only difference was that there was no Qingyun Pavilion in Jiangnan City. The members of the Mansion of the Dead seemed to have disappeared from the world. Other than the occasional news of the members of the Mansion of the Dead, there was no trace of Yi Xian and the others. Half a year was not a long time, but it was not short either. Humans were evolving rapidly. Many human cultivators stood out and finally had the power to resist the slaughter of the blood-soul beasts. Everything was developing in a good direction, but the so-called gods in the world kept spreading bad news. In the West, there was a mysterious black-clothed woman who kept killing god spirits. Every time she went to a city, a god spirit would fall at her hands. No one had ever seen this woman's face, but legends of her spread throughout the West. In the East, the so-called gods had completely disappeared and were massacred in large numbers. No one knew who did it, but the people clearly understood one thing, and that was that these gods were only powerful in cultivation, but they could also die. This made the humans cultivate even more crazily, hoping that they could also slaughter gods and devour the cultivation of the so-called gods to accelerate their own evolution. In the east, Rieo City. A golden immortal god's remnant soul exploded into a bloody mist. Yi Xian's body turned into a terrifying vortex, sucking the bloody qi into his body. He sat cross-legged in the void and kept refining it. After a full hour, Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes. A mouthful of turbid air sprayed out from his mouth, causing an explosion to sound out in the air. The 7th one is still not enough, Yi Xian murmured to himself with a hint of disappointment in his eyes. Since he returned to the state of Great Xia half a year ago, he had been traveling all over the eastern countries, constantly looking for these immortal gods' remnant souls to devour. This was because Yi Xian had a feeling that Yuan Ling was about to lose his patience. Only by becoming an immortal as soon as possible could he have enough confidence to face Yuan Ling. The only way for him to reach the late stage of the tribulation realm quickly was to devour the cultivation of these immortal gods' remnant souls. However, Yi Xian didn't expect that the amount of blood qi needed to reach the late stage of the tribulation realm would be so terrifying. Even though he had devoured the cultivation of 7 immortal gods' remnant souls, his progress was still extremely slow. These 7 immortal gods' remnant souls had cultivations ranging from the nascent soul stage to the spirit-severing stage. There wasn't even a single body integration stage cultivator, let alone a tribulation realm cultivator of the same realm as him. If all of them were immortal gods' remnant souls at this cultivation level, Yi Xian calculated that even if he devoured 100 of them, he wouldn't be able to reach the late stage of the tribulation realm. Only by devouring the immortal gods' remnant souls at the tribulation realm would I have a chance to reach the late stage of the tribulation realm. Yi Xian fell into deep thought. However, Yi Xian also understood that when a large number of immortal gods' remnant souls were devoured, the other immortal gods' remnant souls had already started to become vigilant. They had already hidden themselves. As for the Tribulation Realm immortal gods' remnant souls, they were probably accumulating their strength and would appear before him at any time. After all, Yi Xian was also a Tribulation Realm cultivator. In the eyes of these immortal gods' remnant souls, he was also a great tonic. I hope Yueshan doesn't disappoint me, Yi Xian muttered to himself before transforming into a stream of light and shooting into the distance. Mount Moyun was a famous mountain in Xia country. In this era of global turmoil, Mount Moyun was completely devoid of human habitation. It could be said to be a pure land. The underworld had built their headquarters here, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. It also prevented the incident with Takashi Miyamoto from happening again. The Azure Cloud compound was filled with pavilions, terraces, and streams. It was filled with an ancient charm. It stood on the mountainside and was covered by clouds, giving off an illusory and hazy feeling. Inside the Azure Cloud compound, Yi Xian sat at the head of the table while Fatso Huang and Gu Beichen stood beside him. After half a year of recuperation, Wu Juexian and Monk Yuan Su had also managed to survive with the infusion of Yi Xian's blood energy. Chapter 212. Sir, you said that Junting is still alive. Is this true? Fatso Huang asked with a strange expression. Not only did Fatso Huang have a strange expression, but even Wu Juexian and the others were puzzled. They had witnessed Takashi Miyamoto kill Zhuo Junting with their own eyes. Not even her corpse was left behind. In the human world, Junting is indeed dead. But in the underworld, she is indeed still alive. She just can't work with you, Yi Xian said softly. Silence, silence, dead silence. After hearing Yi Xian's answer, Fatso Huang and the others were stunned. Obviously, they did not dare to believe Yi Xian's words. However, they also understood that Yi Xian was not a person who liked to joke. Since he said that Zhuo Junting was still alive, she must be alive. However, they really did not understand. Since Zhuo Junting was still alive, why did she not return to the underworld? And what was the underworld? Yi Xian could completely sense everyone's doubts. This also allowed him to tell his subordinates about the underworld. When Fatso Huang and the others finished listening to Yi Xian's story, everyone's faces were filled with shock. However, after the shock, they were ecstatic. This was because from Yi Xian's story, although Zhuo Junting's physical body was destroyed, her soul had entered the underworld. She was even cultivating with the dark crow in the underworld. It was just that she could not return to the human world for the time being. Fatso Huang and the others did not know who the dark crow was, but they knew that he must be Yi Xian's subordinate. What surprised everyone the most was that their master could control the underworld. Didn't this mean that even if they died, they could still cultivate in the underworld? Everyone was excited and asked about the situation in the underworld. Buzz! Suddenly, just as Yi Xian was talking to everyone, a jade slip glowing with a dark light appeared in the void. A hurried voice came from the void. Master, the 6 paths have collapsed. Please come to the underworld as soon as possible. Yi Xian's expression froze as his eyes narrowed. This voice came from the dark crow. If it wasn't for a huge matter, the dark crow definitely wouldn't have told him. Clearly, something big had happened in the Yama Hell. Sir, this. Fatso Huang and the others were startled. Apparently, they had also heard the dark crow's voice, which made them hesitate. Continue to investigate the traces of the immortal god's remnant soul. I will definitely return in half a year or 3 months. Yi Xian did not explain to the crowd. His body turned illusory and suddenly disappeared from the eyes of Fatso Huang and the others. Meanwhile, in the west, in the Moon God Palace, the 4 remnant souls of immortals and gods stood in the Moon God Palace with their hands behind their backs. Some of them were blazing with divine light, some were covered in blood-red light, and some were releasing demonic auras. Moon Goddess, are you really going to join forces with us to kill Yi Xian? The blood-red light around the green flood dragon king was dense. His cultivation was actually at the early stage of tribulation passing. When he spoke, the moon god palace rumbled and shook. Lady Jade, although my memory is incomplete, I still remember that you are the Jade Rabbit by Fairy Guanghan side. Since you want to join forces with us, we are willing to lend you a hand on behalf of Fairy Guanghan, Great Sun Sovereign said with a smile. Lady Jade was the original name of the moon goddess. Since Great Sun Sovereign knew her name, it was obvious that they were old acquaintances in the Earth Immortal realm. Let's cut the crap. The four of us are all at the early stage of tribulation passing. As long as we swallow Yi Xian's blood and qi and slaughter all the life forms in this world, we can use the osmanthus tree to transform into gods and return to the Earth Immortal realm. We can also tell the situation of this world to the immortals and gods in the heavens. We will definitely be rewarded. Purple Cloud Star Sovereign's blood-red light was chaotic, and there were even specks of starlight surrounding him. That's right. Lady Jade, although your cultivation is at the spirit-severing realm, as long as we can open the gate of guidance, we can bring you back to the Earth Immortal realm. At that time, I hope you can put in a good word for us in front of Fairy Guanghan, the Heavenly Demon King said with a smile. At this moment, Yueshan bowed to the four of them and said with a smile, fellow Taoists and I have all fallen in the hands of Yuan Mo in the past. If Yueshan can return to the Earth Immortal realm this time, I will definitely not forget your great kindness. Ha, well said, well said. However, we have to deal with Yi Xian first. We will have to trouble you with this. The Great Sun Sovereign bowed and said. We will take our leave first and wait for your news. After the Heavenly Demon King said that, he called the other three to leave the Moon Goddess Hall. As the four of them left, the Moon Goddess Hall became silent. Moon Goddess's smile disappeared and she seemed to be deep in thought. No one knew what she was thinking about. Master, these are four immortals at the tribulation passing realm. Are you really going to help Yi Xian plot against them? Maiden Zilin walked in from outside the hall and asked worriedly. Sigh. Moon Goddess had a bitter expression and sighed. It's fine if it's just Heavenly Demon King and the others, but Great Sun Sovereign and I are close friends. Do you really think I'm willing to help Yi Xian plot against him? Master, why don't you beat them at their own game and work together with the four of them to kill Yi Xian? Then, you can return to the Earth Immortal realm, Maiden Zilin advised. Ha! Moon Goddess laughed self-deprecatingly and said that Yi Xian has already planted a blood contract with me. If I really do that, even if I can kill him, my soul will be destroyed and I will die. As Moon Goddess's words fell, Maiden Zilin's face turned pale. She didn't expect Yi Xian to do things so flawlessly. I can only work with Yi Xian. As for Great Sun Sovereign, I can only let him down. Moon Goddess sighed helplessly as a murderous intent flashed past her eyes. If Yi Xian saw this scene, he would definitely laugh in disdain. Luckily, he didn't trust Moon Goddess and planted a blood contract with her. If it wasn't for Yi Xian's decision, things would have gone out of his control. From this, it could be seen that Yi Xian was treading on thin ice on the path of cultivation. Any danger that he could foresee was nipped in the bud. At the same time, in the west, thousands of miles high in the sky, an immortal god's remnant soul was running for its life. Gu Xiaoxiao was wearing a black dress, and her skin was fair and translucent. Dense blood-red hostility rose around her as she chased after the immortal god's remnant soul. In the blink of an eye, Gu Xiaoxiao's slender jade-like hand slapped down and instantly destroyed the immortal god's remnant soul. Large amounts of blood and qi were devoured by her. Rumble. 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 Thick, dark clouds drifted over, and terrifying lightning wreaked havoc in the clouds. A terrifying heavenly aura pressed down on Gu Xiaoxiao. Human tribulation. Gu Xiaoxiao muttered to herself, after passing the human tribulation, I can step into the middle stage of tribulation passing realm. Yi Xian, we will meet again soon. Chapter 213. A cold wind blew and the underworld returned to its original state. The sky was dim, and the earth was withered. A bone-piercing cold wind was howling. Between the heaven and the earth, the great Tao of Yin interwove with each other. Countless ghost soldiers and ghost generals flew across the sky, escorting the dead souls. Fengdu Necropolis. The souls of the dead covered the sky densely. The gate of the six paths was cracked and had stopped operating. The souls of the dead had no place to reincarnate and wandered aimlessly in Fengdu Necropolis. Cries and wails could be faintly heard from all directions, making people feel even more miserable. In front of the Yama Palace, the dark crow raised its head in anticipation. Zhuo Junting's ghost body solidified and countless ghost cultivators stood behind the two. A heavy and austere feeling filled every inch of space. Buzz! The space shook and rippled. A gate was born in the void. As Yi Xian stepped out, the dark crow and the others were overjoyed. They all bowed to Yi Xian. Greetings, Yama King. No need to be so polite. Yi Xian strolled down from the void. He looked around and frowned slightly. The souls of the dead covered the sky and the earth, making it impossible to see the end. The gate of the six paths of reincarnation was dim and had stopped operating. This was the scene that Yi Xian saw. Master, the six paths of reincarnation has collapsed and the heavenly Tao's laws are no longer visible. The souls of the dead are trapped in Yama Hell. Some have turned into malicious ghosts and some have recovered their memories. This situation has been going on for half a month. If this continues, Yama Hell will cease to exist. The dark crow said with a trembling voice. After hearing the dark crow's report, Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. After a dozen breaths of silence, he said, if Yama Hell ceases to exist, what will happen? If Yama Hell collapses, the souls of the dead will stay in the mortal world. Some will die and some will turn into malicious ghosts. At that time, there will be an unimaginable turmoil in the mortal world. And this is only one of the hidden dangers. The biggest one is that when the six paths of reincarnation stop operating, there will be more and more souls left in Yama Hell. At that time, Yama Hell will also collapse and these souls will appear in the mortal world. With the dark crow's tireless explanation, Yi Xian also understood the seriousness of the situation. Obviously, due to the appearance of the blood soul beasts in the mortal world, a large number of humans had died, and the number of dead souls in hell had increased rapidly. With the collapse of the six paths of reincarnation, there was no way for the dead souls to reincarnate. Sooner or later, this world would be overcrowded with dead souls. Yi Xian was deep in thought, so the dark crow and the others didn't dare to disturb him. After an hour, Yi Xian returned from his thoughts, and a trace of poison quietly flashed through his eyes. Yi. Unfortunately, Yi Xian didn't answer her question. He looked at the souls of the dead and clenched his fists. Even his face was flushed. No one knew what Yi Xian was thinking. But when the dark crow and the others saw Yi Xian's strange and sinister expression, they felt a chill in their hearts. It was as if something bad was about to happen. Yi Xian suppressed his excitement with all his might, then calmly said, the six paths gate is merely an incomplete law of the heavens and earth. It won't be difficult for it to circulate again. After all, I've already refined 6 laws and can completely repair the 6 paths of reincarnation. The dark crow and the others were overjoyed at Yi Xian's words. But Yi Xian's next words stunned them. But before that, I have other uses for these wandering souls in Yama Hell. Yi Xian smiled. In Yama Hall, Yi Xian was alone in the vast and empty space. His expression constantly changed. Sometimes he was hesitant, sometimes he was ferocious, and finally he was deranged. There was even a vicious glint in his eyes. The billion-soul subduing banner is a forbidden demonic treasure. With this demonic treasure, I will definitely be able to survive the 9 heavenly tribulations. Even if I step into the earth immortal realm, with the billion-soul subduing banner in hand, I will have a place to stay. Yi Xian paced back and forth in Yama Hall. His voice was low and ferocious. If one listened carefully, they would find that his voice was filled with uncontrollable excitement. Yi Xian had always been an extremely calm person. But now he was so anxious, which indirectly proved how excited he was. Because Yi Xian had discovered a way to survive the 9 heavenly tribulations. This method would definitely allow him to become an immortal in the mortal world. When Yi Xian came to Yama Hell and saw the endless souls with no place to reincarnate, he did not think of helping these souls to reincarnate. Instead, he thought of himself. The immortal scripture was a supreme scripture that had existed since the beginning of the world. If this scripture was called an immortal scripture, it would be better to call it a demonic scripture. The spells and secret techniques recorded in it could be said to be extremely sinister and cruel. Yi Xian had read through the undying immortal scripture and had even obtained the taboo page within it. Within this taboo page, there was an extremely evil refining method. This extremely evil refining method was called the soul-subduing banner. The soul-subduing banner was an item of the demonic Tao. Demonic Tao immortal cultivators would suppress the souls of the dead in the banner and use the souls as a means of attack to kill their enemies. However, although the soul-subduing banner was powerful, it was also a demonic treasure that hurt the enemy by 1,000 but also hurt the user by 800. This item was very common in the Earth Immortal realm. As long as one was a demonic Tao immortal cultivator, basically everyone had one. 100 soul subduing banner. 1,000 soul subduing banner. 10,000 soul subduing banner. Million soul subduing banner. 100 million soul subduing banner. The more souls that were refined, the greater the power of the soul subduing banner. Legend had it that in the Earth Immortal realm, a body integration stage cultivator had accidentally obtained the 100 million soul subduing banner left behind by a fallen demonic immortal. Relying on the 100 million soul subduing banner, he had crossed the realm and killed an immortal. This battle also let the Earth Immortal realm know how terrifying the soul subduing banner was. However, although this demonic Tao immortal treasure was terrifying, the side effects were also extremely obvious. When the body integration stage cultivator killed the immortal, he himself was also devoured by the 100 million soul subduing banner. In the end, he ended up with his soul scattered. However, when demonic Tao immortal cultivators saw the power of the soul subduing banner, they naturally frantically refined this magic treasure. However, this magic treasure of the demonic Tao was harmful to heaven and earth. Moreover, if one's cultivation was not enough to control the souls of the dead in the soul-subduing banner, they would be devoured and die. The most important problem was that the soul-subduing banner could only display its power after refining 1 million souls of the dead. However, to obtain 1 million souls of the dead was tantamount to a fantasy story. Under the eyes of the immortals and gods of the Earth Immortal realm, how could such a harmful thing happen? Although all demonic Tao immortal cultivators knew how terrifying the soul-subduing banner was, they did not have 1 million souls of the dead in their hands. Even if they secretly hunted tens of thousands of souls of the dead and sealed them into the soul-subduing banner, it was just a drop in the bucket. Not only would they not be able to display the power of the soul-subduing banner, but they would also be in danger of dying. Chapter 214. This wasn't the first time I wrote a comment, and of course, it wouldn't be the last time either. I've gone through a lot since I wrote this book. There are people who like it and people who hate it. It might have a lot to do with the style of this book. The book review section is filled with hostility. There are very few trolls because the readers who like this book don't like trolls and have a fiery temper. This is also the reason why there are very few trolls. Actually, you can't really call them trolls. After all, everyone has different preferences. I call this book dark literature. Actually, it's not that dark. The real dark literature should be the kind that goes against humanity, kills friends, and is lawless. It's just that this kind of literature will be censored. Even if it won't be censored, I won't write such things. Although it's a novel, it's already bad content. I define the main character as selfish and ruthless. In order to become an immortal, he can do anything. That's why he kills decisively and acts viciously. Actually, I've written almost 500,000 words. I've condensed 1,000,000 words of content into 500,000 words. There's no exaggeration at all. The pace is definitely very fast. Although this book was published in the urban category, its main focus was on cultivation. Everyone could see that. Moreover, this book doesn't have the routines of the city. For example, going to school, street stalls, practicing martial arts in the park, class gatherings, etc. Actually, I can write this content. If I write this in a city, I can easily write millions of words. But I feel that there are too many people using it. You should be tired of reading it. I want to show you something different. The true content of this book should be after the main character becomes an immortal. Because the main character still needs to grow, in the process of his growth, he will experience scheming and scheming. He will face great enemies, and when facing strong opponents, he will be able to kill them in adversity. These are all things that I haven't written yet. I'll reveal them bit by bit. I'll let everyone see a story that won't be boring. And this story will have to be after the main character becomes an immortal. Back to the main topic. This book is on the shelves, which means that it's going to be paid. Actually, I thought that it would take a few days for it to be on the shelves. But it's very sudden. I just received a notice that this book will be on the shelves at noon tomorrow. Fatso did not want to act pitiful, nor did he want to say anything dignified. He wrote for feelings and to earn money to support his family. I knew that a lot of readers would leave after I started charging for the book. Some might go and read the pirated version, while others might just give up on the book. After all, the current plot was rather bland, and I was also speeding up the pace. I wanted the main character to become an immortal as soon as possible and enter the exciting plot that I wanted to write. Perhaps some authors would say in their testimonials that 1 chapter would only cost a dime, and 10 chapters would only cost $1. In a month, it would only cost a pack of cigarettes, 2 bottles of water, and 1 breakfast. But Fatso didn't want to say that because he knew that they weren't just reading his book. They were reading other authors' books. Just reading these books would cost a lot. Fatso only wanted to say one thing here. If there are any brothers who like this book, I hope you can support Fatso officially. Because each of your subscriptions is my motivation to continue writing. Fatso didn't have anything to repay you brothers. He could only do his best to write this book. This is the only thing that I can do. Tomorrow, at noon, this book will be on the shelves. At that time, I will release 5 chapters at once. Other than these 5 chapters, I will release as many as I can from noon to night. I estimate that there will be at least 10 chapters tomorrow. Everyone, please lend me a helping hand. Little Fatty bowed and expressed his thanks. Written on January 27, 2019, 18:22 p.m. Chapter 2:15. Because of this, the soul-subduing banner in the Earth Immortal world was only a magic treasure for some unorthodox demonic cultivators. However, Yi Xian was different because the forbidden chapter of the Immortal scripture contained a secret technique to refine the soul-subduing banner. He didn't have to worry about the danger of being devoured by the souls of the dead. Most importantly, when Yi Xian entered the Yama underworld, he saw countless souls drifting between heaven and earth. This was enough to refine the legendary soul-subduing banner. There was no so-called benevolence, nor was there any so-called pity. Creating a billion soul-suppressing banners was Yi Xian's ambition. Whether it was for the sake of transcending the 9 heavens' immortal tribulation to become an immortal in the mortal world, or for the sake of a heaven-shaking battle with a primordial spirit, with the billion-soul suppressing banner in hand, Yi Xian was extremely sure that his chances of winning would greatly increase. Moreover, Yi Xian understood one thing. If he really entered the earth immortal world, the soul-subduing banner would be the foundation of his life. Cultivators cultivated their fate and defied the heavens. Yi Xian, after 4 years of fighting in the Blood Sea, understood how precious it was to be alive. He absolutely didn't want the immortals in the heavens to control his fate. He wanted to climb the 9 heavens step by step until he could look down on all living beings. The soul-subduing banner had to be refined. This had nothing to do with morality or benevolence. Yi Xian admitted that he was selfish. Even if millions of souls couldn't rest in peace, he absolutely wouldn't change his mind. I would rather betray the world than let them betray me. This was Yi Xian's principle. Of course, before this, the materials needed to refine the soul-subduing banner had to be prepared. What made Yi Xian very excited was that the materials needed to refine the soul-subduing banner were items of extreme ease that could be found in the Yama underworld. When Yi Xian handed a list to the Dark Crow frowned because the materials on the list were extremely precious in the Yama underworld. Dark water essence, extreme ease cold iron, 3 live soul-devouring worm. The Dark Crow murmured in horror. Then, he looked at Yi Xian with a slightly embarrassed expression and said, Yama King, the nether water essence and the extreme ease cold iron are easy to obtain, but the 3 live soul-devouring worm is extremely rare. Even in the Yama hell, you can only find it by chance. 3 days, I will only give you 3 days. After 3 days, I want to see all the materials on the list. Yi Xian coldly interrupted the Dark Crow. Your subordinate will do his best. The Dark Crow's expression was troubled. I'm not asking you to do your best, but you must do it. If you can't gather these materials in 3 days, then you can bring your head to me. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. The Dark Crow's expression changed after seeing Yi Xian's ruthless expression. He knew that Yi Xian was not just joking. If he couldn't complete the mission given to him by Yi Xian, then he would really die. Yes, your subordinate obeys. The Dark Crow said in a trembling voice. He quickly left the Yama hall with the list of materials in his hand. Obviously, 3 days was too short and the Dark Crow didn't dare to delay for even a moment. Looking at the Dark Crow's departing figure, Yi Xian's face flushed. He clenched his fists and murmured in a cold voice, the billion-soul-subduing banner. As long as I have this thing, I can be truly fearless. Yi Xian had a very strong premonition that the day of his immortality was really not far away. 3 days passed in a hurry. During these 3 days, the Dark Crow led countless ghost soldiers to search for the materials Yi Xian needed all over the Yama hell. On the 3rd day, the Dark Crow finally placed the materials to refine the billion-soul-subduing banner in front of Yi Xian. The gloomy light was dazzling and bone-chilling. When a large number of materials were piled up in the Yama hall, Yi Xian's furrowed brows finally relaxed. A trace of blood quietly flashed across his eyes. Yan Jun, may I know what you need these materials for? The Dark Crow asked cautiously. The billion-soul-subduing banner. These 4 simple words came out of Yi Xian's mouth, but the Dark Crow was instantly stunned. He didn't recover from his shock for a full 10 breaths. Yan Jun, you can't. The Dark Crow's body was trembling. The gloomy light around him fluctuated violently. He looked at Yi Xian as if he was looking at a madman. Why not? Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and said in a slightly cold voice. Yan Jun, please understand. The billion-soul-subduing banner is a forbidden item between heaven and earth. Not to mention in this Dharma ending age world, it is a legendary item even in the earth immortal world. Although there are billions of dead souls in the Yama hell, if you really refine this item, with your current cultivation, if the billion soul subduing banner backfires, not only will you die, but the Yama hell will also very likely collapse under the backlash of the billion soul subduing banner. The dark crow trembled as it tried to dissuade him. It truly didn't think that Yi Xian would be so crazy as to actually want to refine such a legendary taboo item. Thinking of the terror of the billion soul subduing banner, the dark crow's legs went weak. This forbidden item that went against heaven and earth was an item that could kill immortals and gods. If something went wrong, it would bring a devastating disaster to the Yama hell. No one can question my decision. You only need to act according to my will. Do you understand? Yi Xian said coldly. Looking at the murderous intent in Yi Xian's eyes, the dark crow couldn't help but shudder. He hurriedly bowed and said, "The dark crow understands. For 7 days, without my permission, no one is allowed to take a step into the Yama hall. Anyone who dares to disobey will be killed without mercy. You can leave now." As Yi Xian said coldly, the dark crow's breathing became chaotic. He bowed to Yi Xian and quickly left the Yama hall. Clearly, he was extremely frightened by Yi Xian's craziness. Rumble. The door of the Yama hall slowly closed until it was tightly shut. It fell into silence. Inside the Yama hall. In the deathly silent atmosphere, the sparkling dark fire flickered. Apart from the pile of refining materials on the ground, the atmosphere of the entire Yama hall could be said to be extremely oppressive. Huff. Yi Xian breathed slowly and exhaled slowly. He tried his best to calm his emotions. Looking at the refining materials, his eyes revealed a crazed look that had never been seen before. When Yi Xian calmed down and raised his essence, energy, and spirit to the peak, he finally made his move. Quick. Yi Xian's expression was grave. He pointed his sword and a speck of blood light appeared at his fingertips. A small mountain of refining materials suddenly rose into the air. Yi Xian's body also erupted with terrifying black demonic flames. All of a sudden, something terrifying happened. Yi Xian's expression was ferocious. He cut open his own chest with his sword fingers. There was no sign of pain on his face. It was as if this self-mutilation was not inflicted on him. Poof! Large amounts of essence blood spurted out from his chest. In an instant, the small mountain of refining materials was soaked in a magnificent blood-red color. The screams of the dead could be heard from the void. With my essence blood as the guide and my primordial spirit as the medium, melt. Yi Xian roared savagely. He drew a circle with his palms. The terrifying black demonic flames around him instantly drowned the refining materials. Chapter 216. 7 days and 7 nights passed. The dark crow and Zhuo Junting were waiting outside. Their complexions were a bit pale because during these 7 days, the entire Yama palace had been shaking violently. Occasionally, there would be crimson rays that reached the sky and overflowed with a terrifying yin light. "Dark crow, what is Mr. Yi refining?" Zhuo Junting asked in a trembling voice. I can't say. The dark crow smiled bitterly and shook his head, but his pupils were constricting. In fact, he really didn't want Yi Xian to be able to refine the soul-subduing banner. After all, this forbidden item was too terrifying. Boom! Heaven and earth roared and the earth quaked. The entire Yan Luo Dian exploded. The terrifying dark light and ghostly qi ran through heaven and earth. Just the aftermath of the power turned a large number of surrounding buildings into ashes. Did Mr. Yi succeed? Zhuo Junting asked in surprise. Ha ha ha. Suddenly, an uncontrollable laughter came from the ruins of the Yan Luo Dian. In the billowing dust, Yi Xian's eyes were blooming with blood light and he held a black banner tightly in his hand. Did he really succeed? Looking at the soul-subduing banner in Yi Xian's hand, the dark crow's voice trembled uncontrollably. At this moment, Yi Xian laughed wildly and his entire person seemed a little crazy. He couldn't suppress his excitement because the soul-subduing banner in his hand was refined from his own blood essence. Not only did it waste a large amount of his qi and blood, but it also consumed all of his equipment. Fortunately, the heavens didn't disappoint those who worked hard. After 7 days and 7 nights of refining, Yi Xian finally completed the soul-subduing banner. As long as billions of souls were sealed in this banner, it could truly display the terrifying power of the soul-subduing banner. The soul-subduing banner was 3 feet and 7 inches long. A wisp of dark light constantly rose from the soul-subduing banner. The black banner fluttered in the wind and the blood-red flagpole seemed to be made of blood. There were also some ancient and mysterious symbols carved on the soul-subduing banner. At this moment, Yi Xian tried his best to calm himself down. He looked at the souls in all directions and an uncontrollable coldness flashed through his eyes when he opened and closed them. Yan Jun, this is the soul-subduing banner. The dark crow's eyes narrowed and his voice trembled. Yi Xian slowly shook his head and said in a cruel voice, only by refining billions of souls and sealing them into the soul-subduing banner will be the soul-subduing banner I want. Boom! Yi, Crow, and Yi Xian and Zhuo Junting were shocked by the 9 underworld's yellow springs reincarnated the souls of the dead, a boat beheaded a youth. There are 2 lamps in front of the dead, one dim and one bright. One illuminates the path of the mortal world, the other illuminates the 9 underworld's door. Life and death are unknown. Ancient heaven, ancient earth, ancient universe, ancient year, ancient month, ancient time. The soul-subduing song was unhurried, illuminating the past and present. Yi Xian was chanting in the void. The heavens were shaking and the earth was collapsing. The ancient scripture turned into glowing runes that crisscrossed between heaven and earth. The scripture Yi Xian was chanting was a forbidden art in the immortal scripture called the 9 underworld soul-subduing song. It was also a forbidden art. This art was extremely cruel and was the key to the creation of the soul-subduing banner. Woo woo woo. The 9 underworld soul-subduing song reverberated between heaven and earth. Billions of souls howled miserably. They were not under their own control and all rushed toward the soul-subduing banner high in the sky. Withdraw. His roar could shatter mountains and rivers and suppress all things. Yi Xian's face was gloomy. Sweat rolled down his forehead and his face was pale. Obviously, the thought of creating the soul-subduing banner gave him a lot of pressure. After all, these were hundreds of millions of souls. If it was any other tribulation stage cultivator, they would have long since been devoured by the hundreds of millions of souls. If it wasn't for Yi Xian's half-immortal body and the forbidden secret technique of the 9 nether soul-subduing song, Yi Xian probably wouldn't dare to act so crazily. Subdue! Yi Xian roared ferociously. When he formed a seal with his hands, the soul-subduing banner turned into a glowing vortex. An extremely terrifying suction force bloomed between heaven and earth. Buzz! A terrifying thing happened. Countless souls surged in. The soul-subduing banner swayed, but it still stood firmly in the sky, sucking in countless souls into the banner. A chilly wind blew and the souls roared. When hundreds of millions of souls were sealed in the soul-suppressing banner, they screamed in pain. Countless ghostly faces were faintly discernible on the banner, causing anyone who looked at it to be extremely horrified. Living Scripture. Dead Man Method. Vast heaven and earth soul-subduing song. Dead souls scatter. Een souls howl. 9 underworlds return, don't look back. Homesick terrace. Empty tears. How many sorrows in the world. Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the void. He slowly recited the scripture. Scripture after scripture rang in the void, and the billions of souls gradually quieted down. After half a day, there were no more Een souls roaring in this part of the world. Suddenly, Yi Xian opened his eyes. His eyes were slightly dim, but they were filled with uncontrollable excitement. When he stretched out his palm, the soul-subduing banner in the sky changed its light until it turned into a small banner 3 inches long. It shot toward Yi Xian. When the soul-subduing banner entered his hand, it was cold to the touch. It made Yi Xian's primordial spirit fall into a trance. The roars of billions of souls rang in his ears. Yi Xian's expression changed. He kept circulating the undying immortal scripture to isolate the roars of the souls. The chilly light was bright and light as if it was weightless. The 3-inch banner was sparkling and translucent in Yi Xian's palm. However, the chilly light on the banner made people feel as if their souls were being pulled in at a glance. "Is this the soul-subduing banner?" Yi Xian said weakly. However, if one listened carefully, they would notice that his voice was trembling. At this moment, there were no more souls wandering between heaven and earth. The deathly stillness gave people a sense of silent terror. Because Yi Xian had refined the soul-subduing banner, a taboo item that went against the harmony of heaven, it had also emptied the underworld. "Come in." Yi Xian was silent for a full 10 breaths. When he spoke softly, the soul-subduing banner turned into a chilly light and merged directly between his eyebrows. "Congratulations, Yama Monarch, on refining the soul-subduing banner. Your future on the immortal Tao is promising." The dark crow bowed, a look of reverence flashing through his eyes. Others might not understand the terror of the soul-subduing banner, but how could the dark crow not understand? The billion-soul-suppressing banner was a taboo item in the legends. Even in the legendary Earth Immortal realm, no one had ever heard of a billion-soul-suppressing banner being born. This kind of demonic treasure was extremely terrifying. With this treasure in Yi Xian's hands, when the 9 heavens immortal tribulation descended, Yi Xian had an extremely high chance of passing the immortal tribulation and becoming a legendary immortal. How long had it been? A full 10,000 years. Chapter 217. In this Dharma-ending age world, no one had become an immortal for 10,000 years. Becoming an immortal had become an illusory legend. However, when the dark crow looked at Yi Xian in front of him, it was as if he was looking at the birth of an immortal. Immortal and mortal. These two simple words had the difference between heaven and earth. This was the difference in the level of life. Immortals meant immortality and could live as long as the heavens. The mortal realm. The sky was clear and blue for thousands of miles. A ripple spread out in the air, and a door of Yin light opened in the mortal world. Yi Xian took a step forward and walked out of the door of Yin light. He looked up at the blazing sun in the sky, and a bright smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. This trip to the underworld had allowed Yi Xian to forge the soul-suppressing banner. Now, he only needed to step into the late stage of tribulation passing before he could face the immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens. The sea has turned into mulberry fields and the vicissitudes of time. When thousands of years have passed and I return to my homeland one day, what will this world look like? Yi Xian's eyes flickered and there was a hint of bitterness in his eyes. He knew that he would eventually leave this world for the sake of his obsession and for the sake of his Tongtian immortal Tao. Yi Xian suppressed his fluctuating emotions and a trace of a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. As he took a step forward, he transformed into a streak of light that shot towards the direction of Moyun Mountain. The cloud-piercing mountain. Clouds and mist curled around the towering mountain range. The undulating mountain range was like a long dragon that spiraled between the heavens and the earth. Azure Cloud Pavilion, Martial Arts Arena. The members of the underworld were cultivating diligently. The sound of their fists and feet dancing caused the air to explode. Blazing blood light illuminated the vast sky, giving people a feeling of vitality. Wu Juexian, dressed in green, was guiding the members of the underworld in their cultivation. Monk Yuan Su took in a few disciples and passed down his Buddhist and demonic arts. Fatso Huang and Gu Beichen were sparring with each other, laughing and cursing from time to time. The atmosphere was harmonious and thriving. This was the scene that Yi Xian saw. When Yi Xian appeared in the void, everyone present was delighted. They stopped cultivating and bowed to Yi Xian. "Welcome back to the underworld, sir." Looking at his subordinates, Yi Xian was silent. After a full 10 breaths, he said, "Gather all the members of the underworld. I have something to tell you." Dong 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 dong. 18 consecutive bell chimes rang throughout Cloud-Scraping Mountain as a large number of underworld members gathered at the training grounds. Cloud-Piercing Mountain. Yi Xian sat at the head of the table while Fatso Huang and the others stood to his left and right. Thousands of members of the underworld stood there with solemn expressions. However, there was confusion in everyone's eyes. They did not know what Yi Xian had to announce. "Today, I have gathered everyone here to announce something. From now on, I, Yi Xian, am no longer the master of the underworld. The new underworld monarch will be succeeded by Fatso Huang." Buzz! The void trembled and blood light filled the sky. The bloodthirsty demon sword quietly appeared in Yi Xian's hand. The cold blood light reflected everyone's stunned expressions. Everyone felt as if their souls had left their bodies. They could not believe their ears. "Sir, please don't do this. How can I be the master of the underworld?" Fatso Huang's face turned pale. He suddenly knelt in front of Yi Xian. He was terrified and uneasy. He did not know why Yi Xian wanted to pass the position to him. This bloodthirsty demon sword is indestructible and there is nothing it cannot destroy. It has been with me for many years. Although it is not my true weapon, I have a deep affection for it. Now, I give this sword to you. From now on, you are the new underworld monarch. Come and take the sword." Yi Xian's voice was very calm. It was so calm that there was not a single ripple in it. However, it contained a will that would not allow anyone to disobey. "Sir, I..." Fatso Huang wanted to say something but hesitated. However, under Yi Xian's deep gaze, he took the bloodthirsty demon's sword with trembling hands. "Sir, please don't do this. You are the leader of the underworld. Apart from you, no one else can convince us. If you don't take the position of underworld monarch, I'm afraid that some people will not be convinced," Monk Yuan Su said anxiously. Following Monk Yuan Su's words, the thousands of people present began to discuss. "That's right. The master of the underworld can only be Sir Yi. Although Fatso Huang is very capable, his cultivation base is too ordinary. How can he lead the underworld to the peak? If you ask me, if the underworld monarch really wants to step down from the position of underworld monarch, Lord Wu Juexian should take over the position. After all, Lord Wu Juexian is about to step into the nascent soul stage. I think Monk Yuan Su is a good choice. His cultivation base is not any weaker than Lord Wu Juexian's and he is very meticulous. The position of underworld monarch should belong to Monk Yuan Su." The entire martial arts practice field became abnormally noisy, and the sound of discussions could be heard. Obviously, the underworld was not an iron bucket. Everyone had someone they respected. If Yi Xian were to step down from the position of underworld monarch, the fight for the position alone would cause chaos in the underworld. "Are you trying to turn the world upside down?" All of a sudden, an eerie and cruel voice exploded in the cloud-piercing mountain, causing the thousands of members of the underworld to shut their mouths in shock. Only then did they realize that Yi Xian's expression was as gloomy as still water. An extremely terrifying evil aura was blooming around him. "Please forgive us, underworld monarch. We dare not." The thousands of members of the underworld trembled before they all knelt down. "Remember, Fatso Huang is the person I've chosen. If anyone refuses to accept this, you may step forward now." Yi Xian looked around at the crowd as a fierce murderous intent flashed across his eyes. When Yi Xian finished speaking, the entire place fell into a dead silence. No one dared to say another word. Everyone knew that if anyone dared to disobey Yi Xian's will, the only outcome would be death. Sir, you've passed the position of underworld monarch to Fatso Huang and we don't dare to have any complaints. However, I really don't understand why you're doing this. Are you not going to care about the underworld in the future? Cold Blood asked in a trembling voice. Cold Blood's question was the same as everyone else's question. Everyone stared at Yi Xian in confusion and waited for Yi Xian's answer. At this moment, Yi Xian's murderous intent was no longer present. His expression turned calm once again as he spoke in a low voice, I'm leaving. Perhaps I'll never see you again. From now on, whether or not the underworld can be passed on will depend on you. Silence. Silence. A deathly silence. Everyone in the crowd was stunned into silence. Panic blossomed from their bodies. After a dozen breaths, thousands of people's pleas rang out in the martial arts arena. Underworld monarch, you can't leave. If you leave, what should we do? Sir, the underworld is the underworld because of your existence. If you leave, where will the underworld go? Underworld monarch, please stay. Cries and pleas rang out incessantly. Even Wu Juexian and the others tried to persuade Yi Xian. However, Yi Xian remained unmoved. All good things must come to an end. I've gathered all of you here today to bid you farewell. You'll have to walk your own path in the future. I believe that even if I, Yi Xian, am no longer in the underworld, you won't disappoint me. Chapter 218. Fatso Huang, come with me. Yi Xian got up from his seat and slowly walked towards the Azure Cloud Pavilion. Fatso Huang sighed and quickly followed Yi Xian into the pavilion. Azure Cloud Pavilion. Yi Xian had his hands behind his back. His eyes were slightly drifting as he looked at the endless sky through the window. No one knew what he was thinking. Fatso Huang knelt before Yi Xian. His face was covered in tears. Clearly, he was grieving because Yi Xian was about to leave. Alright, you're already an adult yet you're still crying like a child. Won't others laugh at you if they see you? Yi Xian retracted his thoughts and jokingly scolded Fatso Huang. Sir, this subordinate only wants to stay by your side. I have no interest in the position of Netherlord. Please take care of me first. Fatso Huang's eyes were red. There was no trace of his previous viciousness. Instead, he was sobbing like a sad child. Sigh. Yi Xian sighed and slowly shook his head, you can't go where I'm going. If you can become an immortal in the mortal world one day, maybe we'll meet again. Become an immortal? Fatso Huang was dazed after hearing Yi Xian's words. He seemed to have understood something and bitterly smiled. He kowtowed to Yi Xian and said, so sir is about to become an immortal. This subordinate congratulates you. Yi Xian helped Fatso Huang up from the ground after seeing the tears on his face. A scripture appeared in his hand and he handed it to Fatso Huang. This is the great heavenly demon art. It's a cultivation method in the immortal scripture. You need to practice diligently. If you can cultivate the heavenly demon body, no one in this world will be your match. If the world's spiritual energy recovers one day, maybe we'll meet again. The scripture only had a few pages. It was personally written by Yi Xian. Fatso Huang received it with great care, but his tears could not stop flowing. Sir! Fatty Huang was sobbing uncontrollably. He never thought that Yi Xian would actually think so highly of him. Not only did he pass down the position of the underworld lord to him, he even gave him a cultivation method. Fatso Huang knew that the immortal scripture was Yi Xian's main cultivation method. The great heavenly demon art was a cultivation method from the immortal scripture, so one could imagine how precious it was. The underworld was created by me. All of its members are fiendish people. When I'm here, they won't dare to have any thoughts of betrayal. But if I leave, the underworld will probably change. Yi Xian said calmly. An extremely terrifying blood qi grew at the tip of his finger. As Yi Xian suddenly sent the blood qi into the bloodthirsty demon sword, Yi Xian's voice rang out once more. You can use this source of blood essence 3 times. It can be considered the last bit of help I can give you. I believe that with your methods, Fatty Huang, you will be able to truly suppress this group of villains. If I return to this world many years later, I hope that the underworld will still exist. Remember, you must treasure the bloodthirsty demon sword and the great heavenly demon art. You must not give them to anyone, not even Wu Juexian and the others. This is the foundation of your life. Yi Xian said solemnly. He suddenly turned and walked outside. Fatso Huang stared at Yi Xian's back in a daze. A line of clear tears slowly flowed from his eyes. Bang! Fatso Huang suddenly knelt on the ground. His face was covered in tears as he kowtowed to Yi Xian. His voice was sorrowful and choked with sobs. Sir, Fatso Huang will definitely not let you down. I will definitely let the underworld pass on for generations to come. When the spirit qi of heaven and earth recovers, I will definitely enter the earth immortal realm to follow in your footsteps. Hearing Fatso Huang's words, Yi Xian smiled and gradually walked away. West, Moon God City. Moon God kept pacing in the Moon God Palace. Her face was filled with anxiety. She even looked outside the palace from time to time, as if waiting for someone to arrive. Buzz! The void trembled and ripples spread. When Yi Xian quietly appeared in the Moon God Palace, Moon God's face lit up. She hurriedly bowed to Yi Xian and said, Mr. Yi Xian, you're finally here. Is everything done? Yi Xian asked with a deep look in his eyes. It's all done. The 4 strongest immortals are all in the early stage of the crossing calamity realm. I've already set up the blood sea formation according to your instructions. As long as they step into the formation, it'll be easy for you to kill them with your cultivation in the middle stage of the crossing calamity realm, the moon goddess whispered. Good, you've done well. Yi Xian nodded slowly, his eyes flashing with blood-red light. For immortal god remnant souls in the early stage of the tribulation stage. According to Yi Xian's prediction, as long as he devoured their cultivation, he should be able to enter the late stage of the tribulation stage and attract the 9 heavens immortal tribulation. As long as he passed the 9 heavens immortal tribulation, he would be able to become an immortal in the mortal world. I have already sent a message to the 4 of them. They are on their way to Moon God City. They should arrive in half a day. I just want to remind you that although the memories of these 4 people are incomplete, the spells they used are all celestial spells. Even if they are powered by blood qi, their power should not be underestimated. Are you sure you can? Moon Goddess wanted to say something, but she stopped. The worry on her face was obvious. This is not something you should worry about. As long as you lure them into the blood sea formation, they will definitely die, Yi Xian said with a cruel smile. In the boundless desert, the sand was howling. The sun in the sky was extremely scorching, and the rays of light that poured down made this part of the world even more unbearably hot. However, in the distant horizon, 4 resplendent streaks of light were shooting towards Moon God City. Whoosh, the light of the 4 immortal god remnant souls dissipated. They swooped down from the sky and landed in Moon God City. However, as the 4 of them looked over, they realized that the bustling Moon God City was empty. It was basically an empty city. Something is wrong. Heavenly Demon King narrowed his eyes and said coldly. Dao friend, you are too cautious. Moon God must have scattered the humans in the city. After all, she is kind and doesn't want these humans to die in vain, Great Sun Sovereign said with a smile. Fellow Taoist Great Sun, you must be on guard against others. Although you and the Moon God were old friends, you must know that this battle with Yi Xian concerns whether or not we can return to the Earth Immortal Realm. It's best to be careful. The Green Dragon King said in a low voice. I don't think there will be any problems. After all, Moon God is of the orthodox lineage of immortals. Furthermore, she is by Fairy Guanghan's side. I can't think of any reason why she would harm us, Purple Cloud Star's sovereign objected. Ha ha ha. How have you been, my 4 Dao friends? Suddenly, Moon God's soft laughter rang out. 2 figures walked out of the Moon God Hall. However, when the 4 of them saw Yi Xian, their expressions instantly turned cold. They looked at Moon God with shock and anger. Lady Jade, what is going on? Great Sun Sovereign asked with a trembling voice. He gritted his teeth so hard that they creaked. Chapter 219. Idiot, is there even a need to ask? The 2 of them are in cahoots. The heavenly demon king angrily rebuked as a bloody mist bloomed around him. He looked around fearfully, afraid that he would fall into some kind of trap formation. Let's go. The Green Dragon King said coldly as sweat appeared on his forehead. He knew very well that Yi Xian was at the mid-stage of the tribulation stage and had cultivated the Immortal Sutra. Even if the 4 of them joined forces, they could only fight to a draw with Yi Xian. Furthermore, the Moon Goddess had lured them here. How could she not have set up a backup plan? There must be an unimaginable killing formation hidden in the Moon Goddess city. Boom! The 4 of them did not waste any time and directly turned into 4 streams of light that shot into the sky. They had no intention of fighting Yi Xian to the death. They knew that since Yi Xian dared to appear in front of them, he had obviously joined forces with the Moon Goddess and must have a way to kill them. They had to leave this place first so that they could settle the score with the Moon Goddess in the future. Since you're here, stay here. Rumble. The sky was sealed and the ground was trapped. The bloody light covered the sky. When Yi Xian's emotionless voice sounded, a terrifying bloody light suddenly rose from all directions and trapped the entire Moon Goddess city, leaving the 4 of them with no way to escape. Bang! 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 Bloody light crisscrossed for 5,000 kilometers as talisman markings of slaughter soared into the sky. Numerous blood-colored grand formations revolved in space while numerous 30 kilometers sword lights that pierced through the sky swept through space, causing this expanse of the heavens and the earth to ceaselessly collapse and recover. It was an extremely terrifying scene. The void was collapsing and the ground was sinking. The 18 bloody formations rotated in the sky, causing the 4 immortal gods' remnant souls to look at each other in horror. Their faces were extremely pale. The Blood Sea Formation, it's the Blood Sea Formation. The heavenly demon king roared in a trembling voice. There was great fear in his eyes. 10,000 years ago, Primordial Demon had activated this formation and killed them, as well as suppressed them under the Blood Sea. The 4 of them had a deep impression of the Blood Sea Formation's terror. Lady Yu, are you crazy? You are of the orthodox lineage of immortals. How dare you help Yi Xian deal with us? Don't you know that this person cultivates the immortal scripture and is the successor of Primordial Devil? If this matter were to spread to the earth immortal realm, even if you are the maid of Fairy Guanghan, how would the immortals and gods of the heavens forgive you? Great Sun Sovereign roared while trembling. Fellow Taoist Great Sun, I'm sorry. Only Yi Xian can bring me back to the earth immortal realm. If I wasn't forced by circumstances, I wouldn't have done this. In the face of her old friend's anger, Moon God felt ashamed, but she could only sigh and retreat with a cold expression. Yun Yang. Looking at Moon God's cold face, Great Sun Sovereign's face flushed red, and a towering fury finally erupted. Yi Xian, you native of the land of exile. Don't think that you can kill us just because you've cultivated the immortal scripture and laid down the Blood Sea Formation. Great Sun Sovereign gave off a brilliant golden light, and his body seemed to transform into a golden sun. He exploded with destructive waves that caused the surrounding void to collapse violently. Yi Xian, even though you've used all your methods to trap us here, do you really think you can swallow our cultivation and become an immortal in the mortal world? Purple Cloud Star Sovereign's expression was cold, and his body was surrounded by terrifying starlight. Ruthlessness flashed through his eyes, and he definitely didn't want to sit and wait for death. Ha, you're just a mortal of the future. Even though you've received the inheritance of primordial devil, your life level is still that of a mortal. Even though we're only remnant souls, our life level is that of immortals. Do you really think you're primordial devil if you want to kill us? Heavenly Demon King tried to put on a strong front. At this moment, Yi Xian looked at the four of them indifferently, and the bloody light in his eyes condensed. He didn't care about their nonsense at all. What he cared about was whether their cultivation could allow him to enter the late stage of tribulation transcendence. Millstone of Slaughter. Like a sudden clap of thunder from the 9 heavens, like the beating of the war drums of the dead, Yi Xian's palms danced around the universe, and the Tongtian's bloody light pierced through the clouds. Heaven and earth were instantly drowned in the color of blood. Rumble. The 18 blood sea formations moved along with Yi Xian's palms, and they rotated like luminous stars. The mournful and terrifying bloody light slowly merged together until the blinding bloody light broke through the heavens. An extremely terrifying scene appeared. The 18 blood sea arrays disappeared, and a blood-colored millstone that spanned across the sky appeared. Condense the murderous aura of heaven and earth, suppress the souls of the immortals and gods in the heavens. Immortal Tao Divine Technique, Slaughter. His black clothes rustled and his black hair fluttered without wind. Yi Xian's palms danced in the heavens, and the millstone of slaughter was condensed in the endless heavens. This was the great killing technique of the immortal scripture. It could kill immortals and gods, and it had unimaginable power. The heavens had murderous aura, and the earth had murderous intent. There was no end to the murderous aura of the heavens and the earth. This was the millstone of slaughter, and also the millstone of destruction. It was formed by the murderous aura of heaven and earth. As long as there were living creatures in the world, there would never be a lack of killing, and the murderous aura of heaven and earth would never stop. Buzz! The millstone of slaughter rotated slowly. It was heavy in vicissitudes of life, but it was also fierce and oppressive. This was the embodiment of the murderous aura of heaven and earth. Although the 4 remnant souls of the immortals and gods were at the tribulation transcendence stage, facing the great killing technique displayed by Yi Xian, their expressions changed greatly, and they felt frightened. Obliterate. Yi Xian's voice was cruel and ruthless. As the millstone of slaughter rotated, the heavens and earth in all directions collapsed violently, and the endless void was annihilated. This also made the 4 remnant souls of the immortals and gods pale, but they still roared toward the sky and attacked Yi Xian crazily. Die for me. Yi Xian laughed ferociously. He pressed his palms down, and the millstone rotated. The murderous aura of heaven and earth was released wildly, and the millstone of slaughter crashed toward the 4 people. Bang! 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 It was as if the mountains had exploded, and as if the stars had fallen to the earth. When Yi Xian completely broke out the power of the middle stage of the tribulation transcendence stage, and with the help of the millstone of slaughter, the 4 remnant souls of the immortals and gods at the early stage of the tribulation transcendence stage were instantly blown away. Puff! 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 A large amount of blood essence gushed out from the 4 people's mouths. The 4 remnant souls of the immortals and gods stained the sky with blood and fell to the ground. Their appearance of being bathed in blood made them look extremely miserable. Rumble. Yi Xian strolled in the sky until he stood on the millstone of slaughter. His majestic blood qi violently poured into the millstone of slaughter, and the millstone of slaughter smashed toward the 4 people like a meteor falling to the earth. Bang! The heavens and earth exploded, and the earth rumbled. Under the control of Yi Xian, the millstone of slaughter smashed mercilessly on the bodies of the 4 people, and the sound of bones breaking could be heard continuously. Buzz! The millstone of slaughter rotated with a buzzing sound, and the extremely terrifying bloody light gradually dimmed until it dissipated in the void. Yi Xian stepped on the ground and walked toward the 4 people. Despicable man! The heavenly demon king roared with blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. His broken body wriggled on the ground, and he struggled to stand up. However, he was severely injured by the millstone of slaughter and was on the verge of death. In the end, he could only roar at Yi Xian. Chapter 220. Yi Xian, you shameless bastard. Even if I were to self-destruct here, I definitely wouldn't let you devour my cultivation. Great Sun Sovereign's eyes were red, and his body was trembling. It was obvious that even if his soul was destroyed, he would never let Yi Xian succeed. Yi Xian, you bastard. You must be dreaming if you want to become an immortal. Today, even if the four of us self-destruct our cultivations, we will never let you off so easily. Star Sovereign Zi Yun's eyes were bloodshot as he roared. It was no wonder that the four of them were so angry. Logically speaking, they were all in the early stage of tribulation transcendence. Even if they couldn't kill Yi Xian, they should be invincible. However, they were trapped in the Great Blood Sea formation, and their cultivations were suppressed by it. They could only unleash 70% of their cultivation. Furthermore, a terrifying technique like the millstone of slaughter had severely injured them, so how could they be willing to die? Even though their cultivations were suppressed to 70%, it was the last straw that broke the camel's back. One had to know that Yi Xian was in the middle stage of tribulation transcendence and had cultivated a half-immortal body. Furthermore, he had the assistance of the Great Blood Sea formation. Under the circumstances where the four of them could only unleash 70% of their cultivation, this was a massacre without any suspense. If Yi Xian fought them fairly, they could only admit defeat because their skills were inferior. However, under such despicable means, how could they be willing to die? Despicable and shameless? Yi Xian looked down at the four remnant souls of the immortals below him, and a disdainful smile appeared on his face. He said in a cruel voice, "It has always been the winner taking all. Where did this despicable and shameless come from? Remember, only the living have the right to speak. The dead can't speak. If you don't even understand this logic, I wonder how you became immortals." Yi Xian's face was malevolent, and his voice was filled with contempt. Yi Xian, even if our souls are destroyed, you can forget about becoming an immortal. The four of them roared, their eyes filled with madness. Their broken bodies shook violently. Even if they were to self-destruct here, they would absolutely not help Yi Xian. You want to self-destruct? Unfortunately, you're still lacking. Yi Xian smiled ferociously. Four blood-red beams shot out consecutively, instantly suppressing the four nascent divinities that were about to explode, and making them fall to the ground like a pile of mud. After devouring your cultivations, I will step into the late stage of tribulation passing stage. I still have to thank you for your help. Yi Xian stretched out his jade-like hand, the corners of his mouth curled into a sinister smile, and a hint of excitement quietly flashed across his eyes. No one knew how excited Yi Xian was at this moment, nor did anyone know how much torture Yi Xian had gone through to be able to walk step by step to this point. Yi Xian's eyes were a little dazed as he recalled his life's experiences. When he was 5 years old, the snow was falling and the ground was freezing. Mother and son were chased out of the Yi family in the capital. From the age of 5 to 14, his weak and tender body followed his mother to set up a street stall to support the family. When he was 13 years old, he met Xia Qingzhu and experienced his ignorant and inexperienced love. When he was 14 years old, a terminal illness ruined his entire life. He left the hospital alone at night and took a train to an unknown destination to leave his hometown. In the Heartbreak Mountain, he traveled alone without any relatives or friends. He just wanted to quietly die of illness in the deep mountains and forests. He was not frightened by fierce beasts, and he did not feel pain when poisonous insects stung his body. Until his tender body fell in the Heartbreak Mountain and was about to die, he met Yuan Ling, who changed his life. In the Blood Sea battlefield, Yuan Ling cured his terminal illness. Yi Xian felt like he was in a dream. He thought he could return to the embrace of his family, but what awaited him was endless torture. Whipping, beating, he endured Yuanling's hellish torture, forcing him to cultivate the so-called immortal cultivation method. In the Blood Sea battlefield, his tender body fought with strange beasts. He opened his snow-white teeth and tore at the blood souls. He was bathed in blood and cried in pain, but no one could pity him. Struggling in death and recovering in silence, his heart became more and more numb. His body was stained with killing intent, and he gradually abandoned the so-called pity in his heart. Yi Xian finally understood a principle. If he wanted to control his own fate, he had to be the strongest man in the world. He swore in the Blood Sea battlefield that he, Yi Xian, would one day ascend to the 9 heavens and look down on all living things. He would no longer let anyone control his fate. Regardless of whether it was the origin spirit or the fate of the unseen world, he would ruthlessly kill all the enemies that stood in his way and crush them all into pieces. Yi Xian relied on his unimaginable willpower to fight in the Blood Sea battlefield for 4 years. He never stopped for a moment. His cultivation became stronger and stronger, and at an unimaginable speed, he stepped into the tribulation realm from the innate realm. He finally had the right to talk to Yuanling as an equal. Walking out of the Blood Sea battlefield and returning to the bustling city, Yi Xian was shocked to find that he was no longer the tender youth he used to be. Yi Xian pondered as he protected his loved ones and killed some ants. Could it be that this was the life he wanted? It was not until he discovered Yuanling's conspiracy that he finally realized that if he continued to live like this, his fate would be controlled by someone else again. Perhaps one day, he would die in Yuanling's hands. Establishing the underworld, starting the new era, scheming against everything that could be schemed against, and killing all enemies that stood in his way. Yi Xian walked step by step until now. He wanted to become an immortal, and he did not want his fate to be controlled by anyone else. Thinking back, his eyes were cold and filled with unimaginable cruelty and brutality. Yi Xian stared at the remnant souls of the 4 immortals at his feet. As long as he devoured the cultivation of the 4 immortals in front of him, he would step into the late stage of the tribulation realm. He could even usher in the legendary immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens and become an immortal. Kill. The sky exploded, and the earth cracked. It was a simple word, but it filled Yi Xian's heart that he had suppressed for many years. Bang! 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 The void collapsed and a bloody mist filled the sky. Under Yi Xian's berserk attacks, the remnant souls of the 4 immortal gods didn't even have the time to let out a miserable howl. All of them transformed into extremely terrifying blood soul essence qi that floated in the air. I'll devour your blood qi and help me step into the late stage of the tribulation realm. The road to immortality is just ahead. Yi Xian's hair fluttered in the wind as he roared at the sky. The blood light around him was dazzling and turned into a blood vortex, madly absorbing the blood soul essence qi of the 4 immortals. Yi Xian, don't even think about becoming an immortal. Suddenly, at this critical moment, a clear and cold voice sounded out from the void. A black figure quietly appeared in Yi Xian's eyes. That familiar appearance and the bloody light that blossomed from her body caused Yi Xian to be instantly stunned on the ground. Gu, Shao, Shao. Yi Xian clenched his fists and said each word with a pause. His voice was deep and shocked. Gu Xiaoxiao was dressed in a black dress. Her skin was fair, and her hair was tied into a bun. She no longer had the kind smile she used to have. There was only a ruthless and murderous look on her face. She was staring at Yi Xian. Chapter 221. You didn't think that I would appear before you alive, did you? Gu Xiaoxiao smiled coldly. It's Yuanling. Yi Xian woke up from his shock. His face gradually turned cold as he narrowed his eyes. The bloody light in his eyes constantly surged. Teacher taught me the immortal scripture and forged my soul into a leakless body. I went to various places in the West and slaughtered countless humans and Immortal's remnant souls. I even devoured their blood and chi. Finally, I stepped into the middle stage of the tribulation passing stage. And all of this is thanks to you. Gu Xiaoxiao smiled coldly, but the killing intent around her was on the verge of bursting out. You want to kill me? Yi Xian asked coldly. Ha ha ha. Gu Xiaoxiao covered her mouth and giggled. However, as she giggled, her face gradually became ferocious. Her gaze towards Yi Xian was filled with unprecedented hatred. Yi Xian, if it weren't for you, I would just be an ordinary fisherwoman. I would still be living happily in the river village with my brother. Because of you, I died at the hands of Blood Soul. My brother was even trained into a killing machine by you. Don't tell me that I shouldn't kill you. Gu Xiaoxiao yelled hatefully. Yi Xian remained silent in response to Gu Xiaoxiao's question. He did not give any answer. He stared at the woman quietly as a sliver of sorrow flashed through his eyes. The Gu Xiaoxiao I know is not like this. She should be the kindest girl in the world, not a woman who would slaughter countless humans for her own hatred. Yi Xian. You forced me to do this. You forced me to do this. Ah. Gu Xiaoxiao's expression was extremely pained as if she had recalled something. She clutched her head and screamed as if she was in some kind of pain. Soul blood contract. Looking at Gu Xiaoxiao's pained appearance, Yi Xian's eyes narrowed and he instantly understood everything. Yuan Ling must have used a soul blood contract on Gu Xiaoxiao, otherwise she wouldn't have ended up like this. The soul blood contract technique was an extremely sinister technique. This technique could change a person's nature and bring some negative emotions into the soul. This was also an extremely sinister technique in the undying immortal scripture. Yi Xian, don't even think about becoming an immortal. Don't even think about becoming an immortal. Gu Xiaoxiao shouted crazily. The bloody light around her body was extremely blazing. She also cultivated the immortal scripture, so she was not suppressed by the blood sea formation at all. Moreover, her cultivation was also in the middle stage of crossing calamity like Yi Xian. At this time, she was crazily competing with Yi Xian for the majestic blood qi in the void. No one can stop me from becoming an immortal. Even you, Gu Xiaoxiao, are no exception. Yi Xian said coldly. He struck out with his palm towards Gu Xiaoxiao. He would not allow anyone to obstruct his path to becoming an immortal. Bang! The void exploded and the heaven and earth shook. A pair of slender jade-like hands suddenly collided with Yi Xian's. The terrifying bloody light burst out in all directions, making the two of them retreat and confront each other in the air. Yi Xian, we're both in the middle stage of crossing calamity, but you just activated the blood sea formation and wasted a lot of blood qi. I'm in my peak state now. You're no match for me. Gu Xiaoxiao sneered mercilessly. When her jade-like hands crossed, a huge bloody sword condensed in the void and slashed towards Yi Xian with a power that could destroy the heaven and earth. Break! The same bloody sword swept across the sky. Yi Xian's sword finger pierced through the sky, bringing along a huge bloody sword that violently rushed towards Gu Xiaoxiao. Bang! 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 The heaven and earth exploded, the earth collapsed, the void was annihilated and then restored. An extremely terrifying gully appeared on the ground, and a large amount of underground water was gushing out. The two of them both cultivated the immortal scripture and were in the middle stage of crossing calamity. This battle was so intense that it was hard to tell who was winning. In the distance, the moon god's face was pale. Even though she wanted to help Yi Xian, with her cultivation, if she entered the center of the battle, just the aftermath of the energy released by the two of them would turn her into ashes. 3 days and 3 nights had passed. This part of the world was broken and the battle between the two of them was getting more and more intense. However, Yi Xian's face was getting paler and paler, and his face was getting gloomier. Just as Gu Xiaoxiao had said, he had destroyed the remnant souls of the 4 immortal gods and activated the blood sea formation, which had consumed a lot of his blood qi. Gu Xiaoxiao was in the middle stage of crossing calamity, so she was on par with him. After 3 days and 3 nights of battle, he could clearly feel that he was at a disadvantage. If a few more days passed, he might really be defeated by Gu Xiaoxiao. And this wasn't the most important problem. The most important problem was that the 4 balls of boundless blood energy in the air were the foundation of Yi Xian's ascension to immortality. In his battle with Gu Xiaoxiao, he still had to divert his attention to protect these 4 balls of blood energy. On the other hand, Gu Xiaoxiao didn't have any scruples. Every single one of her attacks was extremely ferocious, causing Yi Xian to retreat step by step. Yi Xian, go to hell. Go to hell for me. The sword radiance that filled the sky was like a group of falling stars. Gu Xiaoxiao violently slapped out, and the sound of the sword that tore through the void made people's eardrums buzz. It also carried an extremely terrifying power as it slashed towards Yi Xian. Great Devil Fist. Boom! A devil fist pierced through the sky and violently shattered the sword radiance in the sky. Yi Xian retreated 100,000 feet and then looked at Gu Xiaoxiao with a cold expression. He said in a cold voice, Gu Xiaoxiao, your soul has been transformed by Yuan Ling. Why don't you wake up? Yi Xian, cut the crap. Give me your life. Gu Xiaoxiao had already gone crazy. The blood radiance around her body shot into the sky. She had no other thoughts in her mind except to kill Yi Xian here and now. At this moment, Yi Xian closed his eyes slightly. His face was a little twisted and he let out a long sigh. In fact, even though both of them were in the middle stage of crossing calamity, Yi Xian did not take Gu Xiaoxiao seriously at all. If he wanted to kill this woman, it would be a piece of cake. Not to mention that he had the soul-subduing banner in hand, he also had the heaven-destroying halberd, the #1 killing weapon of all time. Any one of these weapons could easily kill Gu Xiaoxiao. However, Yi Xian did not want to do so because he still owed Gu Xiaoxiao. Back then, it was this kind woman who helped him overcome his inner demons and let him walk out of his decadence. It was also because of this kind woman that Yi Xian realized what he really wanted. Yi Xian was a person who would repay kindness and revenge. Although his methods were dark, he did everything according to his heart. For example, when he returned to the city from the Blood Sea battlefield, Dr. Xia Qiu had helped him. He killed the Li siblings without asking for the reason. It was also to repay Xia Qiu's kindness. However, this time, Yi Xian could only let go of his guilt towards Gu Xiaoxiao because Gu Xiaoxiao had blocked his path. If he did not get rid of this woman, he would not be able to refine the blood qi and enter the late stage of crossing calamity. Yuan Ling, you want to use Gu Xiaoxiao to mess with my state of mind. You really have a good method. Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes and spoke in a cold and cruel voice. He looked indifferently at Gu Xiaoxiao who was charging towards him and did not move. Immortal Slaying Finger. Chapter 222. Rumble. The heavens shook and the earth shook. Mountains and rivers shattered. A black light grew on Yi Xian's fingertip. An extremely terrifying fluctuation bloomed in the sky. The sky darkened and the wind howled. Black lightning flashed in the cloudy sky. Buzz. Yi Xian's expression remained calm. When he pointed his finger at Gu Xiaoxiao, an extremely terrifying thing happened. In the boundless dark sky, an illusory black finger stretched out from the clouds. The void shattered and space distorted. This finger was like the finger of the heavens, capable of shattering everything and slaying immortals and gods. Bang! Gu Xiaoxiao's blood dyed the sky. The terrifying bloody light around her was annihilated. A large amount of blood essence spurted out from her mouth. Her body cracked like a spider web and she fell to the ground like a meteor. Immortal Slaughtering Finger. It was a divine ability in the forbidden chapter of the Immortal scripture. It had the terrifying power to slay immortals and gods. Even though Gu Xiaoxiao was in the middle stage of the tribulation passing realm, she could only die under the immortal slaughtering finger. Boom! Before Gu Xiaoxiao's broken body fell to the ground, Yi Xian tore through the sky and appeared beside her. He gently embraced her. Moo! Blockhead! A sad smile appeared on Gu Xiaoxiao's face. She looked at Yi Xian in a daze. A line of clear tears flowed out from the corner of her eyes. However, blood slowly flowed out from the corner of her mouth. You're awake. Yi Xian's eyes flashed with sadness. His voice was slightly trembling. Awake. I'm really awake. If you didn't shatter my soul, the blood contract that Yuan Ling planted in my body wouldn't be broken. I'm afraid I won't wake up for the rest of my life. Gu Xiaoxiao was like a fairy in the wind. She revealed her kind smile and there was a trace of relief in her eyes. Crack! Yi Xian clenched his fists. Blue veins bulged on his palms, proving how much his mood fluctuated. The soul blood contract was extremely sinister and cruel. Even the caster couldn't break it. Yi Xian had read the Immortal scripture thoroughly. Even the forbidden chapter didn't have a secret technique to break it. From this, it could be seen that this technique was simply unbreakable. Sorry. Yi Xian's voice trembled as he spoke. His eyes were filled with pain and guilt that he couldn't let go of. Silly wood, don't say sorry, you didn't do anything wrong, my hands are stained with blood, only death can free Xiaoxiao. Gu Xiaoxiao's body was illusory. She had a kind smile on her face, and a hint of relief. It was as if she could disappear into Yi Xian's embrace at any moment. Silly blockhead, promise me, you have to live well, help me kill Yuan Ling, kill him. Gu Xiaoxiao was such a kind-hearted woman who had never hurt anyone in her life. Yet, before her soul dissipated, she was able to hate someone so much. From this, it could be seen how much pain Gu Xiaoxiao had suffered. I promise you, I will definitely kill Yuan Ling and make sure you never reincarnate. Looking at Gu Xiaoxiao's illusory body that was constantly cracking, and streams of blood qi that were wrapping around him, Yi Xian clenched his fists. The bloody light in his eyes surged crazily. He knew that Gu Xiaoxiao wanted to transfer all her cultivation base into his body before she died. This should have been a joyous occasion for Yi Xian, but it only made his heart heavier. Silly blockhead. Xiaoxiao is really leaving this time. Xiaoxiao is very happy to have met you. Woo! A sandstorm blew across the sky. Gu Xiaoxiao's body was being destroyed. The bits of blood qi dissipated with the sandstorm, and from then on, she truly no longer existed in this world. Arg! Yi Xian's face was hideous. His eyes were as red as blood. He roared into the sky. The terrifying demonic light and blood qi shot out in all directions, causing the world to explode and then gradually regenerate. Yuan Ling, when I, Yi Xian, become an immortal, it will be the time of your eternal damnation. Yi Xian roared ferociously. The murderous aura that pierced through the heavens and earth swept through the universe. The moon deity, who was watching this scene from afar, turned pale. Fear appeared in her eyes. Rumble. Yi Xian's hair fluttered without wind. His face was cold and emotionless. The four masses of blood qi in the void were violently sucked into his body. He did not hesitate at all and directly swallowed them into his body. Then, he circulated the undying immortal scripture and crazily refined them. Crack! Thunder and lightning crisscrossed thousands of miles high in the sky. A downpour whistled down. In the majestic rain, Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the void. His body was surrounded by a misty bloody light. His terrifying aura was rising rapidly. His cultivation base in the middle stage of the tribulation passing stage was advancing to the late stage at an incredible speed. The rain kept falling and never stopped. Thunder and lightning flashed all over the sky. From time to time, loud rumbling sounds could be heard. It was as if the world was witnessing Yi Xian's transformation. 7 days passed. When Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes, a trace of ruthlessness flashed through his eyes. The blood light that surged around him was completely absorbed into his body. At this moment, the clouds and rain stopped and a ray of sunlight shone on the world. Yi Xian stood up in the void. He seemed to have turned into an ordinary person. There was no aura around him, nor was there any domineering aura. When he opened and closed his eyes, there was only indifference and ruthlessness. The void was distorted wherever he looked, proving that Yi Xian's current cultivation base had entered an extremely unfathomable realm. Mr. Yi, have you reached the late stage of the tribulation passing stage? The moon deity shot over. If one listened carefully, they would find that there was a trace of tremor in her voice. The late stage of the tribulation passing stage. Yi Xian whispered to himself, then slowly shook his head. He looked up at the endless sky and murmured, "It turns out that the records in the immortal scripture are true." Although the late stage of the tribulation passing stage can summon the immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens, there is actually a mysterious realm above the late stage of the tribulation passing stage. This realm is called the Mahayana stage. The Mahayana stage. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the moon goddess's expression froze for a moment before she sucked in a breath of cold air. Her gaze towards Yi Xian was filled with extreme disbelief, and a deep sense of reverence flashed through her eyes. There was an old legend. The late stage of the tribulation passing stage could summon the immortal tribulation. As long as one could survive the immortal tribulation, one could immediately become an immortal. However, there was another realm that had been circulating in the earth immortal world. This realm was called the Mahayana stage. There were immortal cultivators who did not summon the immortal tribulation in the late stage of the tribulation passing stage. Instead, they constantly tempered themselves and stepped into a mysterious realm called the Mahayana stage. No one knew what this realm was for immortal cultivators. However, without exception, all immortal cultivators in the Mahayana stage were respected in the earth immortal world when they passed the immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens. The moon deity knew of one person. That person was the sovereign of the 3 realms. Legend had it that before the sovereign of the 3 realms became an immortal, he attracted the immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens when he was in the Mahayana stage. In the endless years that followed, he became the sovereign of the 3 realms. At this moment, the moon deity heard Yi Xian's words. This clearly confirmed that Yi Xian had stepped into the legendary Mahayana stage. How could this not make her feel extremely shocked? Could it be that Yi Xian will really be respected in the earth immortal world? The moon deity's heart trembled as she guessed in horror. However, he did not know why. When he stepped into the Mahayana realm, he had a feeling that it was easy for him to display the cloud riding technique, and he could cultivate this method with just a thought. Yi Xian didn't think about why he could use this technique. It was as if this was his innate talent, and it didn't cause any ripples in his heart. In the suburbs of Xia country's Jingdu, there was a nameless mountain range that rose and fell. Emerald green pines could be seen everywhere on the mountain, and the chirping of birds could be heard from time to time. When a cool breeze blew over, it carried with it the fragrance of plants, causing people to feel refreshed when they breathed in. On the top of the mountain, a sea of clouds was steaming. Yi Xian stepped on the ground, and the black cloud under his feet disappeared without a trace. He looked at the steaming sea of clouds in the distance, and jumped down the cliff. At the bottom of the cliff, there was a stone cave that was simple and unadorned. When Yi Xian entered the stone cave, a cry of surprise came into Yi Xian's ears. "Master, Mr. Yi is here." In the depths of the stone cave, the spiritual spring that used to be there had dried up, Lu Bai's primordial spirit was dispirited, and he was drawing something on the wall. He looked so focused that even Xue Jiayi's cry of surprise didn't wake him up. "Don't disturb him." Yi Xian walked over slowly until he stood beside Lu Bai. When he stared at the formation on the wall, Yi Xian's eyes suddenly narrowed, and a strange look flashed across his eyes. Heaven and earth hang upside down, the 8 gates of life and death, the yin and yang qi twist the heaven and earth, this formation. Yi Xian's eyesight was so sharp that he could tell at a glance that the formation drawn by Lu Bai was extraordinary. What surprised Yi Xian the most was that if he guessed correctly, this formation was the peerless formation that Lu Bai had been studying for a long time. It was a formation that he created to help him resist the 9 heavens' immortal tribulation. Wrong, it's not the yin and yang qi that twist the heaven and earth, but the origin of heaven and earth. It uses blood to create spiritual qi, and the 9 heavens' immortal thunder to forge the immortal body. I call this formation the inverse immortal formation. This is also the best formation that I, Lu Bai, have created in the past few hundred years. Lu Bai's primordial spirit trembled violently, and he didn't notice Yi Xian's existence at all. He stared at the peerless formation on the wall, and his whole person had already sunk into madness. No, this gate of life is just a hair's breadth off. If the immortal thunder descends, the whole formation will definitely collapse completely. Lu Bai said to himself crazily. His illusory palm wiped away a flaw, and he continued to focus on modifying the peerless formation on the wall. Mr. Yi, ever since you sat down and discussed Tao with my master a few years ago, my master has been studying this inverse immortal formation without sleep or food. However, he has now sunk into paranoia, and no matter who calls him, he doesn't respond. Xue Jiayi's face was full of worry, and she bowed to Yi Xian. Looking at Lu Bai's paranoia and focused expression, Yi Xian sighed. A blood light grew on his fingertip, and he quietly pointed at Lu Bai's glabella. His voice sounded like the morning bell and evening drum. "Brother Bai, wake up." Buzz. Lu Bai's primordial spirit fluctuated, and his originally focused expression became confused. Then, his eyes quickly focused. When he saw Yi Xian's face, he suddenly said in surprise, "Brother Yi, when did you come?" "Master, you scared me to death. If Mr. Yi didn't come, I was really afraid that you would exhaust your primordial spirit and die." Xue Jiayi choked with sobs, and quickly told Yi Xian about how Lu Bai had been immersed in the inverse immortal formation for the past few years. This also made Lu Bai look embarrassed. He kept comforting Xue Jiayi, and only then did Xue Jiayi stop crying and smile. After quickly comforting Xue Jiayi, although Lu Bai's primordial spirit was weak, his voice was extremely excited. "Brother Yi, you gave me many ancient books on formations back then. I studied them day and night, and finally created this inverse immortal formation. As long as you give me 3 more years, this peerless formation will be perfected. By then, Brother Yi, your chances of passing the 9 heavens immortal tribulation will increase by 20%. Looking at Lu Bai, who was as excited as a child, Yi Xian sighed and said, "Brother Bai, it's been hard on you all these years. I appreciate your kindness, but I'm afraid I won't be able to use this inverse immortal formation." Hearing Yi Xian's words, Lu Bai was stunned. Then, he said anxiously, "Brother Yi, have you already entered the late stage of the tribulation stage and can summon the 9 heavens immortal tribulation?" Looking at Lu Bai's unstable primordial spirit, Yi Xian nodded gently, obviously confirming Lu Bai's guess. This also made Lu Bai's breath become chaotic, and a touch of bitterness flashed across his eyes. "Sigh, I, Lu Bai, am still incompetent. After a few years, I still haven't completed this inverse immortal formation." Lu Bai laughed at himself. Chapter 224. Lu Bai looked solemnly at Yi Xian and said, "Brother Yi Xian, if you listen to my advice, wait another 3 years. 3 years later, the immortal defying array will be completed. At that time, when you go through the tribulation to become an immortal, this array will help you. Lu Baiyi looked solemnly at Yi Xian and said, Brother Yi Xian, if you listen to my advice, wait another 3 years. 3 years later, the immortal defying array will be completed. At that time, when you go through the tribulation to become an immortal, this array will help you. 3 years? Yi Xian's eyes flickered as he looked in the direction of the heartbroken mountain. A bloody light quietly flashed across his eyes. Yi Xian knew that Lu Baiyi was doing this for his own good. If it was an ordinary 9 heavens immortal tribulation, Yi Xian would naturally not care about it. However, he had killed countless people and carried the burden of countless lives on his shoulders. His 9 heavens immortal tribulation would be extremely terrifying. Even though Yi Xian had the soul-subduing banner as his trump card, Yi Xian was not very confident about his own 9 heavens immortal tribulation. In the Earth immortal realm, only 1 out of 100,000 cultivators who had cultivated to the late stage of the tribulation passing stage could survive the tribulation to become an immortal. This ratio was extremely terrifying and also proved the horror of the immortal tribulation. The immortal defying array created by Lu Baiyi could increase the chances of success by 20%. This seemed to be only a fifth, but in fact, it was already a heaven-defying move. It also proved that Lu Baiyi was a rare genius in the Tao of arrays. If this array appeared in the Earth immortal realm, countless cultivators in the tribulation passing stage would desperately fight for it. A great war between cultivators would probably break out. In the eyes of cultivators, 3 years was just a blink of an eye. However, in Yi Xian's eyes, 3 years was too long. He simply could not wait for 3 years. Now that he had reached the Grand Ascension stage and possessed the soul-suppressing banner, he had a 50% chance of transcending his immortal tribulation. Yi Xian also believed that even without Lu Baiyi's immortal-defying formation, he could still become an immortal in the mortal world. Then, he could return to the Blood Sea battlefield and truly shed all pretense of cordiality with Yuan Ling. He could destroy Yuan Ling's soul and prevent him from reincarnating for eternity. Brother Bai Yi, I appreciate your kind intentions. However, I can't wait for 3 years. I've come here to fulfill my promise. I've found a physical body for you so that you can reappear in the world once more. Yi Xian said softly. He waved his hand through the air, and the body of a young man appeared. A misty blood-red light shone from the body. This person's talent is extraordinary. His cultivation is at the gold core stage. I've destroyed his primordial spirit without harming his body at all. Brother Bai Yi, as long as you possess this physical body, you can once again embark on the great way of immortality. Yi Xian paused for a moment and continued, however, I want to remind you that the spiritual qi of heaven and earth has declined. Brother Bai Yi, if you want to cultivate again, you can only devour the blood and qi of others to improve your cultivation. If the spiritual qi of heaven and earth recovers one day, you can also become an immortal. At this moment, Lu Baiyi's aura was in chaos, and his gaze towards Yi Xian was filled with indescribable gratitude. He originally thought that he wouldn't be able to complete the immortal defying formation, so he didn't have any extravagant hopes that Yi Xian would fulfill his promise. However, Lu Baiyi did not expect that Yi Xian would actually find a suitable physical body for him. This made him so grateful that he could only kneel and kowtow to Yi Xian in the void. Buzz! Yi Xian waved his hand through the air and lifted Lu Baiyi's body. He said in a gentle voice, Brother Bai Yi, you don't have to do this. Quickly possess this body. I'll give you a hand. Lu Baiyi was not a pedantic person. He would not say any words of gratitude, but he would remember Yi Xian's kindness in his heart. He quickly integrated into the body of the young man and let Yi Xian use the soul-fixing technique so that Lu Baiyi's primordial spirit could perfectly integrate with this body. An hour later, Yi Xian waved his sleeve and the misty blood-red light dissipated. Lu Baiyi also fell into a deep sleep. However, his new body was blooming with vitality. Obviously, with the help of Yi Xian, this possession was very successful. Shui Ji, take good care of him. If the spiritual qi of the world recovers in the future, perhaps Brother Bai Yi and I will meet again one day. Yi Xian did not stay. He turned and walked out of the cave. This made Shui Ji's eyes fill with hot tears. She knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Yi Xian. She said, Master and Shui Ji will remember Master's kindness. If we cannot repay Master in this life, we will work like an ox or a horse in our next life to repay Master's kindness today. Shui Ji's words came from behind. Yi Xian smiled and did not pay too much attention to it. However, Yi Xian did not know that his casual act of kindness today would give him unimaginable help in the future. It would also help him overcome a great crisis of life and death. Yi Xian walked out of the mountain. The distant capital came into view. A trace of melancholy flashed across his eyes and a trace of hesitation rose in his heart. In the capital were his family, Mother Yi, Yi Ling, and his younger brother, who he hated for not living up to his expectations. When he was about to face the heavenly tribulation of the 9 heavens, he did not know whether he should go see them or not. Regardless of whether he succeeded or not, he would have to leave this world. Perhaps this would be the last time he could see them. From now on, they would be separated by heaven and earth. He would never see his family again. With a trace of melancholy and a trace of absent-mindedness, Yi Xian smiled bitterly. He did not use the cloud riding technique. Instead, he followed the vast earth and walked step by step toward the capital. The capital. It was a modern metropolis. The once bustling traffic was no longer there. The people who lived in the capital all more or less knew martial arts. There were also immortal cultivators with boundless vitality. They flitted through the void. The world had changed. After Yi Xian spread martial arts throughout the world, humans had already embarked on the path of evolution. Only by strengthening themselves could they fight against the blood-soul strange beasts and truly allow humans to stand tall in this world. The clean streets, the emerald green willows. Yi Xian strolled through the crowded streets. What was surprising was that with every step Yi Xian took, a large number of people parted like the tide. However, there was not the slightest ripple, and the pedestrians on the road did not feel any surprise. Although Yi Xian was in the world of mortals, he was also isolated from the world of mortals. This was his method and Tao. It was like the rising of the sun and the setting of the moon. It was only natural that it would not attract anyone's attention. The center of the capital. A towering stone statue stood there, and from time to time, passers-by would stop and bow before the stone statue. Everyone's face was extremely pious, and they were all murmuring and praying to the stone statue. When Yi Xian arrived and saw this scene, he was slightly stunned. Then, he smiled, and there was not the slightest ripple in his eyes. The stone statue was 70% similar to Yi Xian. Beside the stone statue was a brand new stone tablet. On it was engraved the legendary deeds of Yi Xian. Exterminating the beast tide, slaying the gods, spreading martial arts throughout the world, slaughtering various ancient sects, and spreading his cultivation manuals to the world, small, densely packed words were engraved on the stone tablet. There were also many children cheering in front of the stone tablet. Their young voices were calling out Yi Xian's name. Chapter 225. Yi Xian's body was illusory. He wasn't an immortal, but he was more like one. He quietly looked at the myriad of living beings and deeply imprinted this scene in his mind. He knew that this might be his last glimpse of the mortal world. From now on, he would be free to swim in the vast sea and free to fly in the vast sky. Everything in the mortal world would no longer have anything to do with him. He leisurely turned around and calmly left. No one knew that Yi Xian had been here, and no one would know that Yi Xian no longer existed in this world. The city was bustling with noise and people. Yi Xian slowly walked in the direction of the Yi clan's courtyard in his memories. His closest relatives in the mortal world were there. Yi residence. A large Shi character was pasted on the wall. Guests came and went in an endless stream. All kinds of congratulatory words could be heard, giving people a very festive feeling. It was as if the Yi residence was holding a grand wedding. This Tuoba Yuntian is really lucky to be able to marry Miss Yi Ling heir. This is his fortune from his previous life. What do you know? Although the Tuoba family isn't very famous, they are still a family of cultivators. I heard that Tuoba Yuntian has already entered the Golden Core stage and is a leading figure among the younger generation. The two of them can be said to be a match made in heaven. Pfft, so what if he's in the Golden Core stage? You should know that Yi Ling heir's brother is the divine king Yi Xian. He's a figure who created an era. Why would the Yi family care about a Golden Core stage cultivator? A large amount of discussion sounded out from the mouths of the guests as they entered the Yi family's courtyard together. Their words naturally fell into Yi Xian's ears. So, today is my sister's wedding day. Yi Xian's eyes were in a trance. After a full 10 breaths, he regained his senses and strolled into the Yi residence. However, no one could detect his presence. The courtyard of the Yi clan was no different from what Yi Xian remembered. It was still the same as before. The only difference was that the servants of the Yi clan were all cultivators. The weakest among them was at the innate stage. This also proved that the Yi clan was no longer the same as before. There was a hubbub of voices, and it was extremely lively. Dozens of banquets were being held in the courtyard, and guests from all over the place were greeting each other. Every one of them had an incomparably honorable status, and if they were not the big shots of a region, then they were the patriarchs of some clan. Obviously, being able to receive a marriage invitation from the Yi clan also proved their honorable status. Yi Xian stood apart from the crowd. He saw many familiar faces. There were people from the Martial Security Bureau, Azure Dragon Tianyu, Yun Mengyao, as well as two of his subordinates, Merciless Blood and Steamed Bun. Clearly, because of their relationship with Yi Xian, they were all here today to attend Yi Linger's wedding. Yi Xian did not go over to greet these people. Instead, he quietly found a secluded place to sit down and quietly waited for the wedding to begin. Hey, little brother, are you also here to attend Sister Ye's wedding? A cheerful young girl was sitting in the middle of the banquet, bored. The surrounding guests had already gone to the center of the banquet, waiting for the Yi clan to appear. When she suddenly noticed that there was an extra person beside her, she asked Yi Xian casually. I guess so. Yi Xian calmly smiled, and considered it as an answer to the young girl's question. Hey! When the young girl saw Yi Xian's face clearly, she frowned slightly and said, Little brother, have I seen you somewhere before? Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not answer the young girl's question. Instead, he calmly looked forward, because amidst the sound of firecrackers, Yi Linger was walking out of the Yi clan's inner hall, hand in hand with a handsome young man. After not seeing each other for so many years, Yi Linger was no longer the young girl she used to be. Her youthful and immature appearance had already faded. Her appearance could not be said to be devastatingly beautiful, but she had the beauty of a pretty girl from a humble family. Everyone, it is the Yi clan's honor to be able to attend my daughter's wedding today. I, Yi, would like to express my thanks to everyone. Yi Tsanghao's hair was white. Beside him was Mother Yi. The two of them were glowing with health. They clasped their hands and thanked the guests. As Yi Tsanghao finished speaking, all sorts of compliments and congratulations were heard. In a moment, the atmosphere of the banquet became lively again. Wow, Sister Yi is so beautiful. The young girl's eyes sparkled as she looked at Yi Linger with envy. At this moment, looking at his little sister holding the arm of the young man beside her, her face blooming with happiness, Yi Xian's eyes were a bit absent-minded. His little sister's words from when she was young rang in his ears. It was a cold and bleak autumn. The brother and sister were sitting on a haystack, laughing and talking. Brother, when Linger grows up and gets married, you have to personally send Linger off. Yi Linger, who was still a child, made funny faces at Yi Xian and giggled. Stupid girl, how old are you? You're already thinking of such embarrassing things. Brother, do you agree or not? Yi Linger shook Yi Xian's arm and said coquettishly. Okay. On the day you get married, I will personally send you off. His thoughts turned. Just like in front of him, when Yi Linger's face merged with that of the little girl of yesteryear, a trace of bitterness quietly flashed through Yi Xian's eyes. Little sister, I've kept my promise. Today, I will personally send you off. Yi Xian muttered to himself. Little brother, what are you talking about? The young girl beside him asked in surprise. She felt that this person beside her was strange, but she couldn't remember where she had seen him before. First, bow to heaven and earth. Following a loud and clear voice, Yi Linger and the young man beside her bowed to heaven and earth, their faces filled with happiness. Second, bow to your parents. Yi Hao and Mother Yi sat down and let the newlyweds kneel and offer tea. Mother Ye's eyes were filled with tears of joy, and she constantly reminded Yi Linger of some things. Husband and wife, bow to each other. The newlyweds bowed to each other. The ceremony is complete. Pa. Under the blessings of many friends and family, Yi Linger was finally married and was about to start a new life. Mr. Tuoba, can you share your thoughts on marrying Miss Yi as your wife today? One of the guests below roared with laughter. Tuoba Yuntian was about 25 or 26 years old. His appearance was handsome and refined, and he was indeed a dragon among men. However, right now, he seemed a little uneasy, and his face was a little red. However, he still happily said, I have known Linger for 2 years, and we have experienced a lot together. In the future, I, Tuoba Lu Yun, will definitely not let her down. As Tuoba Lu Yun's voice fell, a large amount of applause was heard, bringing the festive atmosphere to a climax. Miss Yi, do you have anything to say? One of the guests at the right time spoke, causing the crowd to roar with laughter. Obviously, they also wanted to see Yi Linger's shy face. However, what surprised the guests was that Yi Linger's face did not have the slightest bit of shyness. She bit her lips slightly, and in her eyes, there was a trace of mist, until it turned into clear tears and flowed down her cheeks. This also caused the laughter of the guests to abruptly stop. Chapter 226. Once, when I was young, there was someone who said that he would personally send me off, but he didn't appear today. I think I won't be able to see him in the future. Yi Linger smiled sadly, causing the joyous wedding banquet to become silent. Everyone knew who Yi Linger was talking about, but no one dared to comfort her, because everything about that person had become a legend. Perhaps it was not just a legend, but an existence that was feared by all. Without this person, mankind might be heading towards extinction. Okay, little sister, big brother has his own things to do. If he knows that you are getting married today, he will definitely give you his blessings. Yi Ping came to Yi Linger's side and comforted her softly. Auntie, don't cry, hug. A beautiful woman was carrying a baby in her arms. The baby was only 2 years old and was just learning to speak. He reached out a pair of small hands to Yi Linger and was giggling. Obviously, the woman was Yi Ping's wife, and the baby was also Yi Ping's flesh and blood. After a few years, Yi Ping had also gotten married early and even had a child. Yi Linger hugged the baby in her arms, and the sad smile on her face gradually disappeared. In the corner of the wedding banquet, Yi Xian watched this scene quietly, completely speechless. He did not expect that before he left the mortal world, he would be able to see his younger sister get married and have a child. This was considered a perfect ending. Linger, today is a happy day, let's toast to the guests here. Mother Yi was a little sad, but still walked to Yiling-er's side and comforted her. The heavy atmosphere passed in the blink of an eye, and the joyous atmosphere came again. With Tuoba Yuntian holding hands, Yiling-er and her husband raised their wine glasses and toasted the guests table by table. At this time, because Yi Xian was sitting in a remote place, other than the young woman beside him, the other guests at the table had already surrounded Yiling-er and her husband with wine glasses in hand, and were even congratulating them. Yi Xian slowly got up. His face was solemn and sorrowful. He slowly knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times to Mother Yi in the distance. Under the surprised gaze of the young girl beside him, Yi Xian slowly got up. A jade box had appeared in his hand at some point, and he pushed it in front of the young girl. "This is my wedding gift to Yiling-er. Please pass it to her later. Tell her that I have never forgotten the promise I made back then." After Yi Xian calmly finished speaking, he deeply imprinted the faces of Mother Yi and Yiling-er into his mind. There was no longer the slightest bit of reluctance in his eyes. He quietly turned around and walked out of the Yi family courtyard. "Hey, you still haven't told me who you are," the young girl reprimanded in dissatisfaction. "Lin-er, who are you talking to?" At some point, Yiling-er and her husband had arrived in front of the young girl. Looking at the young girl's bitter expression, Yiling-er asked curiously. "Humph. Just now, there was a strange person who kowtowed 3 times to Aunt Yi. He even told me to give this to you. He said it was a wedding gift for you. I don't know if this person is crazy or not." The young girl's face was filled with dissatisfaction. She continuously muttered as she passed the jade box in her hand to Yiling-er. Taking the jade box from the young girl's hand, when Yiling-er opened the jade box, 2 human-shaped wooden carvings appeared. This caused Yiling-er's originally smiling face to immediately become lifeless and silent. The human-shaped wooden carvings were vivid and lifelike. It was a young man and woman. One of the wooden carvings was the appearance of Yiling-er when she was young, and the other was the appearance of Yi Xian when he was young. Where is he?" Yiling-er tightly held the jade box. One of her hands was tightly gripping the young girl's arm. Her voice was extremely shaky and her face became red. This caused the surrounding guests to be stunned. They did not know what had happened to Yiling-er. Looking at Yiling-er's emotional expression, the young girl's face paled. That strange person left. He told me to tell you, he said, he has never forgotten the promise he made back then." "Brother!" A heart-wrenching cry came out of Yiling-er's mouth. The tears in her eyes flowed uncontrollably. The jade box fell from her hand to the ground. She staggered out of the Yi family's courtyard. This also caused the guests present to look at her in shock. "It's Big Brother is back," Yi Ping said with a trembling voice. This also caused the guests present to be completely confused. Divine King. It's Divine King Yi. Some guests whispered in shock. However, as if there was a chain effect, all sorts of noises could be heard continuously. Outside the Yi family's courtyard, Yiling-er knelt on the ground and cried loudly. Her originally exquisite makeup was already blurred by her tears. She kept looking for traces of Yi Xian, but she did not even see Yi Xian's figure. "Brother, I know you haven't left yet. Come out and see me." Yiling-er's heart was filled with grief. Her voice was hoarse and miserable. At this moment, Yiling's mother staggered over with the help of Yi Ping. Her face was even more tear-stained. She was looking everywhere for traces of Yi Xian. Unfortunately, no matter how Yiling-er cried and called, Yi Xian did not appear. It was as if he had really left this place and would never appear in front of his loved ones again. "Ling-er, don't be sad. Big Brother has already left." Yi Ping handed the 2 wooden carvings to Yiling-er. He also let Yiling-er hold the wedding gift that Yi Xian gave her tightly. However, the tears in her eyes could not stop flowing. You guys, look! Someone exclaimed. An extremely shocking scene appeared in the eyes of the guests. When Yi Ling's tears with the two wooden carvings, two misty blood-red rays of light bloomed on the wooden carvings. The two rays of blood-red light soared into the sky, covering thousands of miles of clouds. The vast and terrifying pressure seemed to be able to shatter everything. What a terrifying power, this is the numinous treasure that divine King Yi refined. Someone screamed in horror. It even made the eyes of some people who had evil intentions bloom with greed. However, no one dared to covet the wooden carvings in Yi Ling's hands because they knew that if they really dared to snatch them, the power released by the wooden carvings alone would be able to turn them into ashes. Brother! Yi Ling's eyes were blurry with tears as she cried out sorrowfully. She knew that this was a protective item that Yi Xian gave her and Yi Ling's mother, hoping that they could live a peaceful life. High in the sky, in the void. The fierce wind blew, causing Yi Xian's black hair to flutter in the wind. His eyes were filled with vicissitudes of life and loneliness. Looking at Yi Ling's crying face and Yi Ling's sad face, a trace of sadness quietly flashed across his eyes. Fate comes, fate gathers, fate disperses, fate disappears, let all of this be gone with the wind. A black cloud appeared under Yi Xian's feet. He took a step forward and disappeared into the void. However, his departing figure was filled with vicissitudes of life, and there was even a lonely and bleak aura faintly blooming. Everything in the mortal world, the past, if he, Yi Xian, were to die in battle in the 9 heavens in the future, he was willing to be an ordinary person in his next life. He would always be by the side of his family and die of old age in the boundless secular world. Chapter 227. Half a year. Yi Xian's footprints were left all over the world as he walked through the deep mountains and great swamps, walking through the desert and grasslands. He howled at the sky from the peak of a snowy mountain. He howled at the sky from the boundless grassland. He drank alone in the sky and looked up at the waning moon. Immortal ascension. What a tempting word. But who knew how many choices Yi Xian had to make and how much suffering he had to endure behind the scenes of immortal ascension? Buddha said, there are 7 sufferings in life: greed, anger, ignorance, resentment, separation, unattainable. Buddha said, life is a bitter one. But Buddha forgot to say, the road to immortal ascension is long, accompanied by a cool breeze. Years have passed, and we will never meet again. This is the greatest sorrow and hatred in life. Life was as beautiful as summer flowers, death was as beautiful as autumn leaves. Yi Xian asked himself. He stood proudly at the peak of the world, but when he was about to become immortal ascension, he looked back and saw that there was no one by his side. One person, one path. He cut off the mortal world and put an end to his past. Only the vast stars in the night sky were his companions. However, when all things withered, when the stars fell, when the world was about to be annihilated, when all things withered, when the stars fell, when the world was about to be annihilated, would he still remain undecayed in the world? Yi Xian did not ask for a spectacular next life. He only wanted to be invincible in this life. Whether it was Yuan Ling or the immortals, no one could stop him. Until he reached the 9 heavens and looked down on all living things, he could truly control his own destiny. That was what Yi Xian wanted. Broken Mountain. The first mountain in Xia, and also one of the world's famous mountains. Broken Mountain towered into the clouds, as if it had broken the sky. That was how it got its name. But on this day, Broken Mountain welcomed a person who was about to undergo the immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens. The cold wind of heaven and earth whistled coldly. When the dark clouds dissipated under Yi Xian's feet, he stood at the peak of Broken Mountain and looked at the vast world. When his eyes opened and closed, it was as if the world was distorted. Mr. Yi, are you ready? The moon goddess wore a white robe. She was tall and slender. She bowed to Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian with great hope. The moon goddess knew that she would be able to return to the earth god realm today. I've waited for this day for a very, very long time. It's been so long that I can't sleep at night. It's been so long that I've felt fear and hesitation. Yi Xian said warmly. He was also smiling as he continued, only on this day did I realize that the so-called fear and hesitation no longer existed. There was only tranquility and peace. Moon God did not understand what Yi Xian was saying, but she knew Yi Xian had entered a certain realm. You can leave now. Yi Xian looked up at the sky. His aura was rising slowly. Clearly, he was ready to attract the immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens. Mr. Yi Xian, I wish you success. Moon Goddess bowed and looked at Yi Xian deeply. Then, she floated away. The sky was clear, and the waves were clear. On the peak of Duantian Mountain, Yi Xian stood motionless in the face of the cold wind. His body was glowing, as if he had become the only thing in the world. He was emitting a light that had never been seen before. At this moment, the sky seemed to have collapsed. The thick black clouds were boundless. The thick lightning snakes were like tens of thousands of dragons rising in the black clouds. The Tongtian earth shaking past and present. Boom! The crimson black lightning, the lightning that could destroy the world, and the 9 heavens squall howled in the endless sky. The sky-burning celestial fire that tore through the sky came across the sky. It burned this part of the world, but it was constantly healing. If a mortal was here, they would have turned into ashes and died a tragic death before the 9 heavens' immortal tribulations could even descend upon them. Rumble. The 9 heavens squall howled. The sky-burning celestial fire burned. The tens of thousands of crimson-black lightning raged in the clouds. An unprecedented power of heaven and earth gradually spread toward this world. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of thunder that could shatter one's divine soul was heard, and the mountains in the distance collapsed one by one. Under the whistling of the 9 heavens squall, all of them turned into ashes and dissipated between heaven and earth. The sky became darker and the earth collapsed. The immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens kept forming. Just its appearance in this part of the world had already caused a scene of destruction. At the same time, all over the world. Whether it was the blood-soul exotic beasts or the people of the world, their hearts were all tense at this moment. Their bodies were trembling unconsciously because they saw that the sky above their heads had turned into endless crimson clouds, covering the blue sky. What happened? I can't breathe. At the beginning of the world, all creatures had spirits. However, all creatures with spiritual intelligence were trembling physically and mentally at this moment. Some of the weaker ones even collapsed on the ground, trembling under the pressure of heaven and earth. The satellites of all countries in the world were completely in operation, constantly looking for the source of the changes in heaven and earth. Until the satellites of all countries detected a terrifying scene, the leaders of all countries were speechless. In the satellite image, a person stood at the peak of Duantian Mountain. The mountains within thousands of miles were turned into ashes. The squall whistled between heaven and earth, the heavenly fire was burning the sky, and the crimson-black lightning that covered the sky raged in the universe. Reporting to the chief, it's the Divine King. It's Divine King Yi. In Xia Nation's Heaven's Eye platform, a researcher zoomed in on the satellite image and displayed Yi Xian's appearance. Several big shots in Xia Nation were also shocked speechless. They could not recover for a full 10 breaths. Immortal Tribulation, 9 Heavens Immortal Tribulation. Mr. Yi is going to transcend the 9 Heavens Immortal Tribulation. Azure Dragon roared in horror, which also brought the big shots of Xia Nation back to their senses. They asked Azure Dragon in a trembling voice. What did you say? What's the 9 Heavens Immortal Tribulation? At this moment, Azure Dragon's face was pale, and his voice was trembling as he muttered. Mr. Yi said that if he can pass the 9 heavens immortal tribulation, he can become a legendary immortal. He might be leaving this world. As Azure Dragon's words fell, the pupils of the big shots of Xia Nation constricted. One of the big shots suddenly slammed the table and directly ordered a few researchers broadcast the satellite image simultaneously. Since Mr. Yi is going to become an immortal and leave this world, let all the people of Xia Nation pray for him and hope that he can successfully transcend the tribulation. Yes, sir. The researchers did not dare to be negligent. They immediately switched the image captured by the satellite to the live broadcast of all the major television channels in the country. While all the people of Xia Nation were frightened by the changes in heaven and earth, the screen in the center of all the major cities suddenly switched to the image of Yi Xian about to transcend the tribulation. This also shocked the people of Xia Nation. It was not only Xia Nation. At this moment, the entire world was broadcasting this scene. The entire world also knew that Yi Xian was about to transcend the tribulation. At the same time, Heartbroken Mountain, Blood Sea Battlefield. Yuan Ling stood above the Blood Sea. He looked in the direction of Duantian Mountain through the Blood Sea battlefield. His body was emitting a terrifying demonic light, and his voice was cold and hoarse. Yi Xian, you're not the only one who's been waiting for this day. I've been waiting for you to return as an immortal for 10,000 years. Don't disappoint me. Chapter 228. At the peak of Broken Sky Mountain. In the pitch-black sky, there was a world-destroying pressure. Yi Xian looked up at the sky and indifferently watched the 9 heavenly immortal tribulations condense. I've finally reached this stage. Let me, Yi Xian, see how terrifying the legendary immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens is. Yi Xian murmured to himself. He stretched his arms and the blood-red demonic light around him shrouded him like a flame. The earth-shaking power spread out in all directions with him as the center. Come! Yi Xian's hair fluttered in the wind as he roared at the sky. His eyes were rotating and his body was glowing. The heaven-defying aura moved the heavens and earth. Rumble! The endless sky shook the 9 heavens. Reddish-black thunderbolts fell like stars, carrying the power to annihilate all things as they violently struck Yi Xian. Great demonic fist. One punch shook the heavens and earth. In ancient times, great demons crossed the 3 realms to slay immortals and gods. Today, Yi Xian broke the sky with one punch to pass his immortal tribulation of the 9 heavens. Bang! 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 10,000 immortal thunderbolts roared down and collided with Yi Xian's fist radiance. The terrifying lightning instantly drowned Yi Xian and turned the broken sky mountain under his feet into ashes. But it wasn't over yet. How terrifying was the immortal thunder of the 9 heavens. If it only had this kind of power, how could it make immortal cultivators so fearful? The ground within 100,000 miles collapsed and the void within 1,000,000 miles was shattered. Endless vegetation was turned into charcoal and countless birds and beasts were annihilated by the immortal tribulation. Arg! Under the sky, in the void. Yi Xian's black hair stood on end. His face was sinister and distorted, as if he was suffering from extreme pain. The crimson-black immortal lightning crackled around him. Not only was it wearing down his body, it was also trying to crush his primordial spirit. Yi Xian's body cracked like a spider web under the ravaging of the red-black immortal thunder. A large amount of blood soaked his body. The so-called half-immortal body couldn't bear the burden and could collapse at any time. Brother! Mr. Yi! Nether Lord! Divine King Yi! In all parts of the Great Xia, when this scene was broadcast live on television, the people of the Great Xia, Yi Linger and the others, as well as Fatso Huang and the members of the underworld, were all crying their hearts out. Under the 9 heavens immortal tribulation, the crimson-black immortal thunder mercilessly struck. Yi Xian's expression was ferocious as he formed seals with his hands. Streaks of blood-red runes emanated from his hands, causing his body to constantly regenerate. However, his body was also constantly collapsing. Extremely terrifying sounds came from his mouth. Lightning builds a fiendish body, and a sea of lightning refines the primordial spirit. A terrifying thing happened. Yi Xian allowed the immortal lightning to strike him. Not only did he not resist, he even absorbed all the terrifying immortal lightning into his body. After that, he sat cross-legged in the void and madly circulated the undying immortal scripture. He actually wanted to turn the violent power of the immortal lightning into his own. Puff! 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 His body shattered and blood stained the sky. When Yi Xian did such a crazy thing, he directly suffered an unimaginable injury. As for the moon goddess, who was hiding in the distance, her face was even paler. She cursed loudly, "Madman, you madman! How dare you absorb the immortal lightning into your body? Do you want to die?" At this moment, the moon goddess's eyes were filled with despair. She no longer had any hope that Yi Xian would survive the 9 heavens immortal tribulation. This was because she had never heard of immortal cultivators absorbing immortal lightning into their bodies during the tribulation. Time passed by minute. Although Yi Xian's body was broken, he did not die under the immortal lightning. This also made the moon goddess look at him in shock. A hint of hope gradually appeared in her eyes. "Forge my undying demon body, forge my immortal primordial spirit, condense." Suddenly, Yi Xian's low roar came from all directions. The immortal lightning wreaking havoc on the surface of his body slowly dissipated. His body healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. A 3-inch primordial spirit sat cross-legged between his eyebrows. It was releasing a kind of fluctuation that made one's soul tremble. When the immortal lightning was refined, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were like 2 big stars rotating. Terrifying black lightning flashed in the depths of his eyes, shattering and healing the void in front of him. The 9 heavens immortal lightning is really terrifying. If I didn't use the immortal lightning to forge my undying demon body, just the power of the immortal lightning alone would be enough to kill me, Yi Xian muttered to himself. He stood up in the void and looked up at the sky. The space between Yi Xian's eyebrows glowed. A 3-inch banner shot out. It expanded along with the heavenly wind until it became 1,000,000 feet long, crossing the sky. Yi Xian was not arrogant. He dared to refine the 9 heavens immortal lightning because of a secret technique in the immortal scripture. This secret technique used the 9 heavens immortal lightning to forge his demon body and primordial spirit. Otherwise, Yi Xian would not have dared to do something so crazy. However, Yi Xian understood that although the 9 heavens immortal lightning had passed through the secret technique and allowed him to cultivate his undying demon body, the following 9 heavens squall and heaven-burning immortal fire would be even more terrifying. It was as if an unknown and terrifying thing was descending upon this world. The 3 questions of heaven and earth. Suddenly, a heartless and heavy voice sounded out from the world Yi Xian was in. This voice seemed to have spread from the ancient times to the current world, causing one's heart to tremble when they heard it. It even caused all the living beings in this world to kneel down. A ray of immortal light pierced through the sky, dispersing the endless dark clouds. A strange face appeared in the sky of this world. It was emitting an unimaginable immortal light as it looked down at Yi Xian in the void. Heavens! The moon god's body was trembling. She screamed and knelt in the void. Her eyes were wide open as she stared at the face in the sky. It was as if her soul had left her body. The 3 questions of heaven and earth. It's the 3 questions of heaven and earth. This legendary heavenly punishment actually exists. It was an old legend. In the distant past, there were devil cultivators who massacred the world. Countless living beings died tragically in their hands. When they carried the resentment of millions of dead souls and went through the immortal tribulations of the 9 heavens, they would attract heavenly punishment. This heavenly punishment was called the 3 questions of heaven and earth. What was the 3 questions of heaven and earth? This was the test of heaven and earth, and it was also the punishment of heaven and earth. It was also the ruthless annihilation of the person who went through the tribulations. No matter how peerless one was, no matter how brilliant one was, no matter how many great devil cultivators had died tragically in the 3 questions of heaven and earth. Since ancient times, no one had ever survived the 3 questions of heaven and earth. The few great devil cultivators recorded in the earth immortal world had even died under the 3 questions of heaven and earth. It's over. It's all over. The moon deity's eyes were filled with tears and despair. She knew that under the 3 questions of heaven and earth, even a real immortal would die under the 3 questions of heaven and earth, let alone Yi Xian, who was just a Mahayana cultivator. At this moment, the entire world was filled with the pressure of heaven and earth. All living beings with intelligence were kneeling down. As for Yi Xian, who was in the center, his face was deathly pale. Even his spine, which was as straight as a pine tree, was bending. This proved how terrifying the pressure he was enduring was. So it's true. Yi Xian clenched his fists. Blue veins bulged on his forehead. His voice was shrill and crazy. He should have known that he was carrying a monstrous massacre. His hands were stained with the blood of countless living beings. His immortal tribulations of the 9 heavens would be extremely terrifying. How could it be overcome by merely 3 immortal tribulations? Under the heavenly Tao, all are ants. Kneel down. Vast and vast, emotionless and desireless. This was the voice of the great Tao of heaven and earth. No one could compete with the great Tao of heaven and earth. Crack. Yi Xian's straight back was bent. The bones in his knees were broken. It was as if the stars and the universe were pressing down on his body, forcing him to kneel down to heaven and earth. My fate is in my own hands, not heaven. Yi Xian roared to the sky, as if venting his unwillingness. Just as he was about to kneel down, his face was twisted and ferocious. His unyielding and cruel eyes were shining with a light that had never been seen before. What kind of light was this? Humiliation, anger, cruelty, coldness, and unwillingness to be bound by fate. Cut! Yi Xian was completely mad. His palm turned into a blood-red heavenly knife and cut his own legs cruelly and coldly. Puchi! Blood splattered in the air. His legs were separated. Yi Xian was laughing hysterically. Even though he had no respect for heaven and earth, since he could not resist the power of heaven and earth that made him kneel, he would break his own legs to prove to heaven and earth that he, Yi Xian, was unyielding and fearless. Chapter 229. Blood stained the sky as both of his knees were severed. Yi Xian roared at the heavens. His roar was filled with indignation and sorrow. When this scene was broadcasted live on satellite, everyone looked at each other in a daze. They did not understand what Yi Xian was doing, nor did they understand why Yi Xian had severed his own legs. However, at this moment, everyone was agitated from the bottom of their hearts. Their blood was boiling, and a drop of tear flowed out of each of their eyes. Mom! Mom! Why? Why am I crying? In the east, in an ordinary city, a little girl's tears flowed down her cheeks as she continuously shook her mother's hand and muttered questions. However, the little girl was surprised to find that her mother's face was already covered in tears as she foolishly looked at Yi Xian's body that was fighting against the heavens through the city's screen. It wasn't just the mother and daughter. Every human who watched Yi Xian transcend the tribulation had a drop of terror in their eyes. They didn't know what was wrong with them, but there was a sharp pain in the depths of their hearts. It was an indescribable pain, but it made their tears flow uncontrollably. The world didn't know that the tears they shed were not for Yi Xian, but for themselves. The heavenly Tao was heartless, treating all things like straw dogs. The Tao was heartless, burying the souls of the dead in all ages. Although humans were the most intelligent beings in the world, after 100 years, they would only turn into a pile of bones. They would forever fall into the world of mortals. Generation after generation, generation after generation, they would never be able to transcend. Today, it seemed like Yi Xian was transcending the 9 heavens' immortal tribulations in order to ascend to immortality. However, wasn't this also a struggle between humans and heaven? Breaking the shackles of heaven and earth, breaking free from the shackles of fate, and completely taking control of one's own fate was the desire hidden deep in the hearts of humans. However, since the beginning of heaven and earth, how many people had truly broken free from the shackles of fate and taken control of their own fate? And now, what Yi Xian was doing was exactly what all living beings hoped for. They were crying for themselves. They were crying that they would forever fall into the mortal world, that they could only let heaven and earth take control of their own fate without being able to resist. All living beings suffered, and their hearts were filled with sorrow. When tears blurred their eyes, everyone clenched their fists and silently prayed for Yi Xian in their hearts. Heaven and earth ask, what is love? The heavenly Tao's thunderous voice sounded in the vast heavens. When this voice sounded throughout the world, a Tongtian immortal light descended from the heavens and enveloped Yi Xian's broken body. The sun and moon were reversed, and the universe was hanging upside down. The aura of the passage of time assaulted his face. Yi Xian's already broken body was rapidly aging. His black hair gradually turned white, and his delicate and pretty face was wrinkled. Yi Xian, you severed your kinship and severed the mortal world. You are heartless, unfilial, and disloyal. What qualifications do you have to become an immortal? The vast world was endless. This was the reproach of the heavenly Tao, and it was a heart-wrenching question. In the heavens, under the erosion of the immortal light of time, Yi Xian grew old. But his mournful eyes became calm. Although his aged body was gradually stooping, a warm smile appeared on his face. At this moment, Yi Xian didn't answer the question of the heavens and earth. He only brushed his fingers through the air, and scenes of him growing up appeared in the air. In the cold weather, he was chased out of his home when he was young. He fell seriously ill and was dying. His lover left him. For years of fighting in a sea of blood. Yuan Ling watched him like a tiger watching its prey. He struggled in the midst of death and recovered from the ashes. When these scenes appeared, in the Yi family's ancestral home in the capital, Yi Xian's mother and Yi Linger covered their mouths and wept. They really did not know that Yi Xian had experienced so many unimaginable calamities. How could there be a perfect way to live up to both the Tathagata and the Qing? Yi Xian had a clear conscience. He looked up at the sky and calmly said, when I stepped into the Blood Sea battlefield, I had no way out. Because if I took a step back, not only would I die, but my loved ones would also fall in the mortal world. Heaven and earth, tell me, what is love? The heavens were silent and soundless. The celestial light of time exploded around Yi Xian and disappeared without a trace. His aged body was glowing with vitality. Even his severed knees were regenerating until his body was round and flawless. Heaven and earth ask, the resentment of all living beings. Woo woo woo. Yin winds howled through the air as ghostly figures that blotted out the sky appeared. These were the living beings that had died at the hands of Yi Xian. Not only were there blood-soul beasts, but there were also many innocent humans. Yi Xian, you have killed tens of millions of lives. Your hands are stained with blood, and you bear the anger of tens of millions of lives on your shoulders. What qualifications do you have to become an immortal? A thunderous voice boomed out. This was the great Tao of heaven and earth questioning Yi Xian. Ha! All of a sudden, Yi Xian laughed maniacally. He stared at the resentful souls in the sky without the slightest hint of regret in his eyes. I don't kill people, but others want to kill me. There is only the strong and the weak in this world. There is no right or wrong. This so-called heaven and earth ask is simply a joke. How dare you? The will of heaven and earth was terrifying. Yi Xian's disdainful words caused the heavenly Tao's laws to rotate. An extremely terrifying crimson cloud appeared in the sky. The power that could destroy the heavens violently fell towards Yi Xian. Boom! Heaven and earth within 1,000,000 miles turned into dust. Yi Xian's body exploded in an instant. The majestic blood mist that covered the sky was bleak and magnificent. Divine King Yi. All over the world, mountains and rivers were in turmoil. When Yi Xian was blasted into pieces by the crimson cloud of heaven's punishment, countless humans cried out in grief. It also caused an extremely terrifying change in heaven and earth, causing the strange face that appeared in the sky to constantly distort as if it was suffering great pain. Boom boom boom. Heaven and earth turned upside down and humanity overturned. An extremely terrifying thing happened. Yi Xian had helped humanity create a new era. He was the divine king revered by all humans in this world and also the only faith in the entire world. If not for Yi Xian's martial prowess, humanity would have long been destroyed and mercilessly devoured by the blood-soul beasts. When he suffered the heavenly punishment, the power of faith that had been immersed in it for a long time completely erupted at this moment, displaying an earth-shattering power. The power of faith of one person was not terrifying, but when the faith of all humans in the world gathered together, a long river of humanity appeared in the endless sky. The sound of the vast waves caused the world to tremble. The long river of the 9 heavens traversed the sky. This was the power of humanity, the power of faith, and the power of all living beings. Boom boom boom. The so-called crimson cloud of heaven's punishment was annihilated without a trace under the power of all living beings. The water of the 9 heavens river swept Yi Xian's shattered flesh and blood back. In the center of the river, a blood-colored yuan light bloomed faintly. The power of all living beings. Yi Xian's astonished voice sounded. The rolling river's water condensed his body. His body was enveloped by the power of all living beings and underwent an unimaginable transformation. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.